All right, I will ask you all to give us your undivided attention while we call this meeting to order and have a roll call by the clerk or whoever does that. Councilmember Graham. Councilmember Graham. Will the clerk call the Can I ask those in the audience to continue their conversations? Sonia, I think that means you.
Okay, we ready? Chair Smith? Chair
Present.
Davis? Vice Chair Daniel Schweiker?
Present.
Commissioner Carla?
Here.
Commissioner Brad Newman? Here. Commissioner Jim Ransko?
Here.
Commissioner Sharon Seitz?
Here.
Commissioner Mark Stevens?
He's visiting the facilities.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. And if the other members show up, I know some are here. If they show up, I'll announce their arrival when they get here. The first thing to get into in the meeting is to remind people that citizens may address the members of the Budget Review Commission here regarding any non-agendized item during public comment time, which is now. And by the way, now joining the meeting is Brad Newman, Commissioner Newman. And in order to do so, you take a public speaking card from the desk over here and give us 3 minutes of your time and thoughts. I don't think we have any requests to speak in the public speaking period. I have blue cards here, but these will be used, I think, for item number 3 on the agenda. Is that your understanding, or?
Right now, she said.
What's that?
They speak now, she says.
Do we not have the opportunity for individuals to speak on a particular agenda item? The answer is no. So we will have you speak now. And we will remember your speech when we get around to item number 3 on the agenda. The first speaker is Steve Coluccio, who is with the McDowell-Sonoran Preserve Commission. So Steve, if you want to come give us your thoughts, we welcome those.
All right. Thank you, Chair Smith, Vice Chair Schweikert, Commissioners. My name is Steve Coluccio, and I'm the Chair for the McDowell-Sonoran Preserve Commission. I want to speak to you regarding a specific item in the 5-year Preserve Improvement Plan, that being the Wildlife Overpass plan for Rio Verde Drive. In the early 1990s, the city of Scottsdale established the McDowell-Sonoran Preserve with the vision, in large part, to create a sustainable desert habitat for wildlife and desert flora. In 1997, the Desert Preservation Task Force planned the northern expansion of the preserve. That plan included an overpass for Rio Verde Drive. In 2004, Scottsdale voters approved this plan, as well as a 0.15% preserve tax to fund land acquisition and improvements such as this overpass. Arizona Game and Fish conducted the 2012 Maricopa County Connectivity Assessment and identified a connection between the McDowell Mountains and the Tonto National Forest as a necessary linkage. They wrote that man-made barriers such as roads can affect wildlife movement patterns and pose a threat to the long-term persistence of wildlife populations. In Chapter 21 of the City Charter, which governs the McDowell-Sonoran Preserve, the #1 management objective directs the city to preserve the local plants, wildlife, and natural resources to maintain the biological diversity and long-term sustainability of the area's ecology. Every iteration of the McDowell-Sonoran Preserve Commission for the past 20 years has supported the plan for an overpass, including the current commission, who unanimously approved the overpass a few weeks ago. Scottsdale's 2022 Transportation Action Plan references that a wildlife underpass or overpass may be installed in the vicinity of the 124th Street alignment. Since 2001, Scottsdale's general plans have referenced the need for linkages and migration routes. This includes the 2035 plan, approved by the voters, which included both the transportation and preserve plans in it. The Gooseneck region was planned for and acquired to provide a corridor for movement as residential development continues to encroach on animal habitat in the preserve. So you can see that there's been a 30-year history of planning for this wildlife overpass. I ask that we consider the wisdom that has been demonstrated over the decades, and keep in mind the damage that will occur to the wildlife species in the preserve in the coming decades if we do not. Lastly, I would like to thank Commissioners Newman and Carla for the leadership that they've been providing as we continue to discuss this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. The next speaker is John Zinkins, and he has the donated time of 600 stewards, so he's going to be here for a while, probably. Seriously, I think John will hold it to 3 minutes, and I do apologize to those in the audience. Both of these gentlemen are talking to an item that we will address later as item number 3, but apparently we do not have the capability in our little commission here to have comments germane to the individual items. So even though my preamble said they would be talking about non-agendized items, they most certainly are talking about an agendized item. So go ahead, please. Thank you.
Making sure this all works. Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Smith, Vice Commissioner Schweikert, and Commissioners. My name is John Zikias. I represent the McDowell-Sonoran Conservancy and its over 600 steward volunteers. Today I'm here to speak. I live at 11758 North 134th Street, and I've been a Scottsdale resident or property owner for over 30 years. And I'm speaking to you today to provide information on and to consider regarding the wildlife overpass in 3 key areas: safety, tourism and economic value, and the importance of connectedness and biodiversity of the fauna in the preserve. As you know, Rio Verde Drive near 128th Street is a crossing for the Gooseneck Trail, and while crossing a 2-lane road is hazardous, when the planned expansion of the road is completed, this will become a major barrier to pedestrians. In addition, this will also be a major barrier for hikers, bikers, and especially equestrian. When we talk about public safety, And Scottsdale is a destination for visitors from around the world, and one of the key reasons is outdoor activities. In a recent study, 92% of voters in Scottsdale responded that healthy parks and preserve make Scottsdale a great place to live, work, and visit, which supports our community. and without the wildlife crossing the preserve, we'll not have a healthy ecosystem. The preserve will no longer be an attractive destination. Would it still be worth the more than $1 billion that the taxpayers paid for the preserve? One key factor that sets the preserve apart from other hiking and outdoor destinations is the potential for visitors to both see and enjoy the wildlife in our beautiful Sonoran Desert. And while the preserve is an important ecosystem, regional connectivity is critical to the preserve's long-term health, allowing for the movement of species for forage, food, water, and mating. With the adjacent land, the open space is more than 3 million acres, offering fauna a wide variety of environments, thus attracting fauna from one area to the other. Without this access, the biodiversity of the preserve will surely decline. In 2016 through 2018, Arizona Game and Fish conducted a study to understand deer movement in the preserve. The result of this study indicated that the deer population, due to Rio Verde Drive Road, separated the deer population in and around the preserve into two separate subpopulations. As you can see from this map, you can see the red mostly staying up above Rio Verde Drive, which is right at the top where that gooseneck starts, and the other deer population below. This is not healthy for the deer population long term, as it limits genetic mixing and grazing opportunities due to different topography and flora, which can vary from the northern part of the preserve, the Tonto National Forest, and the southern part of the preserve. These are some of the fauna that are in the preserve today, from deer, ringtails, badgers, even skunks, and my little jackrabbit on the bottom. These are all currently in the preserve from our wildlife camera study that we conducted in November. A wildlife bridge will provide the following benefits: help ensure the viability and health of the fauna in the preserve, ensuring the connectedness of the preserve with adjacent open space. The preserve will remain healthy and viable for residents and guests who visit to enjoy the outdoors. And it will also provide a safe crossing for hikers, bikers, equestrian, and wildlife, enhancing public safety. Thank you for your time, and be open to any questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your input. And we will not entertain questions in this, but we appreciate the public input on the specific on the project or the item. Before I get into the formal agenda, let me make a comment. We talked briefly last week about how we accumulate commissioner thoughts, I'll call them, for ultimately having a shared session with City Council on April 22, at which time we'll try to meet our mandate, which is to advise them on the budget, and then also advise them or ask for their guidance on projects we might undertake in the called a post-budget period. I think I will recommend that any of the 7 of us put our thoughts down on paper and send them to the city attorney, Sherry Scott, and all I'm struggling with here is how we get an agenda for ultimately a work session or a work study session where we might deliberate what our message is going to be. And in order to do that work study session, we need some agenda guidance. And I'm happy to provide that, but I can't take your comments directly from you or your ideas, because if all of you send me your ideas, suddenly I'm king of the mountain here with the input from more than a quorum of the council. So if you send your thoughts to Sherry Scott, and you don't have to wait and do this at the last minute, I think she's can probably create a file folder to put your thoughts in, but ultimately she'll pass on to me in some sort of an anonymous way the comments that we've all made, and then we'll put those in an orderly discussion for a work study and try amongst ourselves to see what comments we want to make to the council. And some of them may be comments that 7 of us will subscribe to. Others may be minority reports, but we'll try to be inclusive in all the comments we provide to council. So do that at your earliest convenience and do it often, perhaps with the fresh remembrance of a meeting. You'll have thoughts that you think should be considered as advice to council at that time. Shoot an email to Sherry, and she will accumulate these all over time. And we will hopefully meet our obligation to advise the council on the 25-26 proposed budget. And I also have to announce that in the middle of the public comment, Mark Stevens arrived, so we are now a full council, or a full commission of 7 members, all present and accounted for. The other thing I'll say before we march into this presentations here is we have a lot of data to look at and a lot of comments on the data. I think I'm going to ask each speaker or presenter to march through the collection of slides they have, and then we can withhold our comments until the conclusion of the presentation and get into them then. So the first presentation, item number 1, is the water and water reclamation capital projects, and Kevin Rose, I think, is going to walk us through that package.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, Commission. I'm Kevin Rose. I'm the Interim Water Resources Senior Director, and be happy to present on our capital projects for both water and wastewater. Don't know, Scott, did you want to cover this first slide, or do you want me to handle it?
Just say that this is a comparison of last year's CIP versus this year's, and if there are any questions, we can address them. But
and one thing the Commission should note is we used to do a 1-year adoption of our CIP. We are going to a 5-year, so we are spreading that out. So as you can see, adopted FY 24-25 is 484, and as we spread out these projects of when they're going to go into construction, you're seeing it go down to a proposed capital budget of $320 million. It is a $1 billion budget, so we are spreading that out to cover that 5 years. First one I want to talk about is our water distribution system improvements. We have over 2,100 miles of pipe in the city of Scottsdale, 11,000 fire hydrants, 14,000 valves, numerous pressure reducing valves. So we use this center to start replacing our aging infrastructure. One thing I always inform individuals is we're like the rest of the valley. Our system's not new, it's not being built. We're in rehab mode. It's getting old, it's middle age. Roughly it's about 50 years old on average when you take the old infrastructure compared to the new. And one thing I do want to point out, I guess one question was the feasibility study only. There was a lot of work to put into this, so there are some errors, and I'll point those out. So we use this to schedule and repair our water distribution system. This center, we have seen a big increase impact due to inflation on the materials themselves, along with a lot of lead times to get the materials in-house. So this is one of our capital areas that we do schedule smaller replacements. And a good example is a mile of 8-inch pipe, a drinking water pipe. This would be the cost center we would use that for. I will be going to council here in the next, I believe, April 8th to start a fire hydrant replacement program. That would come out here. That's about $500,000 to start that for, again, fire hydrants that are 50 years or older and that we're struggling to get replacement parts. So these are the capital project center that we use to replace the infrastructure with the water distribution system. Another one that we use is, it's going to be a new program as we progress to what we call advanced purified recycled water. Scottsdale, we're very well known in the water industry of taking wastewater, recycling it, and either reusing it for irrigation purposes or injecting it in the aquifer. The initial budget was $17 million. As we've gone through this process due to drought impacts, we were based off the current permit that we had. Scottsdale was the first one to be permitted to actually take basically sewer, clean it up to drinking water standards, and serve it to the public. We only had the regulations for that type of permit. That permit has expired because as we worked with Arizona Department of Environmental Quality to develop the new permit or the new regulations, they just got those finalized in March. So as they came closer to the final rule with the regulations, we were working with our engineering consultant to come up with, hey, what would be the design process, the treatment process to implement this program? And as we went through it, they also did a cost estimate. That cost estimate was completed in September of 2024. Rollo did that for us. So that explains the difference on that cost difference there. Initially, it was $17 million. As we got through with this and more regulations were required, redundancy and also disinfection requirements through the state, that was more cost that we incurred. This one's been brought up before, the Bartlett Dam modification. We are in a feasibility study, which costs $400,000, excuse me. And this study is to see the impacts and the viability of building this dam. Our portion, as of today, if they started building the dam, would be $48 million. It is in the later part of the CIP. I do expect this to be pushed out further because we're probably looking at a 10-year window to get this, the dam approved and moving forward, because it is going to be working with the federal government. Booster station upgrades. We've seen a lot of inflation on this one just because of the motors, the electrical side of the booster pumps that are needed to ensure that we can deliver water. We have over 100 booster stations that we have to maintain. So this is an active program that we do with our booster stations to replace whether it's a valve, piping, a motor, or a pump. And as you can see, the proposed increase is only $5.3 million, but we are seeing inflation costs, and it's mostly on the electrical side. The Frank Lloyd Wright 24-inch transmission main and booster station, this one's coming to a close. This started in July of 2015. They're actually starting commissioning this week. We do plan to have the station up and running by August of 2025. And as you can see, over time, we did incur some costs with an initial budget of $15.4 million and the current approved budget to $32.1. Again, that was inflation. COVID was a big impact on this booster station. Booster station, pump station 55, it says rebuild. It's not going to be a rebuild. This will be a new booster station. One thing that we do work with is our infrastructure improvement plan. We're actually in the process of getting that approved, and this will be one here to be approved by council, where we'll need to build a new booster station, and this will be located at the water campus. The area that it will be serving is along the Pima Freeway, the Hayden and Scottsdale. That area we're seeing a big need to increase and maintain the pressure. So this one we're looking to see council improvement, and as of today, it would be $31.8 million. The Shrog Regional Wastewater Facilities. Scottsdale has been part of this well over 50 years. We own 9.9% of the 91st Avenue Wastewater Treatment Plant. And part of the agreement with City of Phoenix, Tempe, Glendale, Mesa, and us is we have to ensure that we have our capital funds available if any capital projects that is approved by all the cities moves forward. It is a big number, but we are looked at up to 2046 to have it there, and it's essentially having $5.2 million budgeted every single year for the 2046, because we know we're going to be part of this well into the future. The Greenway Hayden Loop sewer improvements. This one is going to be coming to close October 2025. And initially was designed for the $11.9 million. With change in zoning and scope, we saw a drastic increase in cost. It jumped up to $67.9 million. To date, we have paid $46.4 million, and that is also part of development and also what the city is going to be moving forward in what we own. The wastewater treatment facility improvements, this is for our Gainey Water Reclamation Plant and the water reclamation plant at the water campus. Again, we're seeing a lot of inflation costs, part of this. We're also seeing the infrastructure deteriorate a little bit quicker. One thing I always say with wastewater is a little bit more aggressive water than your standard water. Has a lot of materials in it that we have to remove. It is aggressive. It does wear down the equipment a lot sooner and the infrastructure. The Jomax Road sewer improvements. This is located off Jomax and Pima. We are going to be putting a new lift station and sewer lines in. This is an area that has a lot of septic, and also we do see growth that we're going to have to put this in. As of right now, we do have the design. We're looking a few years out to get this moving forward, to get it installed. And what it will do, be able to serve the residents and the customers in that area, and we can get people off the septic systems up there to tie into the sewer system. The reclamation plan expansion. This was part of our master planning. We looked at the wastewater flows coming in, and the one thing we have to make sure is we're ahead of those wastewater flows coming in. The plant is capable of treating 24 million gallons a day. As we continue to watch the flows, and you'll see that negative of why did it decrease. Watching the flows, they are increasing, but not increasing as much as we thought. So we're pushing that out to make sure it still stays in the CIP budget for when the flows do increase, we can go ahead and start moving forward to do with the plant expansion. Now again, it's a 24 million gallon plant. This would be a 5 million gallon a day plant expansion. Another one at the water campus is the electrical substations replacement. A few years ago, we did have a failure at one of our substations. Staff responded beautifully, but it spurred us to start looking at all 7 substations up there to ensure that we are not going to be in any challenges. We did have an assessment completed. Initially, we thought it'd be $1 million a substation. Based off that assessment plus an engineer's cost, the budget did inflate to $25.3 million for the electrical substations. I know that was a high-level view. As you wanted, Commissioner Smith, I'd be more than happy to address any questions.
Thank you. I'll yield the floor to Commissioner Seitz first.
Thank you. I was trying to follow along in the book here, and I have a question about 2 of the projects you talked about, the Greenway Hayden Loop.
Mm-hmm.
You have a June 28 completion date, but according to this, there's 21 in 25, 26, and nothing in the out years. Can you help me understand that timing? It looks like everything's going to be spent in 25, 26.
As you can see, best that you can with the diagram up there, it was a multi-phase project. We were up sooner to get this, the sewer line in to ensure that we had service. Optima being a driver, they actually installed it for us, and we reimbursed them they were quicker at doing it than us. So if we did it, we'd be a little bit slower. As of October 25, we'll have this sewer line in service and available for use.
So what confused me was seeing June 28 as a completion, and there's no funds beyond 26.
Correct. Will be done by October of 2025.
Okay. Likewise, I guess I was trying to understand the scheduling of the funds in the 5-year plan.
And please note, we had a 1-year adoption. We are spreading everything out to a 5-year adoption. And with the nearly $1 billion capital budget, it's a lot more challenging than we thought. So we are going through all of these to make sure they're spread out for the 5 years for the appropriate construction.
So this one has the opposite situation, the water campus electrical substations, VL01. I think it says June 26 completion, but there are funds forecasted all the way out to 28.
June 26, that might have been the original. What we're seeing now, we have gone through a preliminary assessment. We are going into design. That's going to be a challenge for twofold. We got to get the design done, and then we have to order the electrical equipment. I'm lucky if I get a 56-week lead time. Typically, we're seeing a lot longer than that. That's been a huge impact on not only all electrical projects, not only this for the substation, wells, booster stations. We're not the only ones. It's across the valley, across many industries. Don't have an answer why it's always electrical equipment. That's such a huge delay. It's a frustration to me because I need to get this up and running. We'll be fine, but it's just we're experiencing long lead times.
Thank you.
Commissioner Stevens?
Yeah, I'm still trying to get my head around some of the big changes we have. Let's just help me understand, like on slide 4 and slide 9, you've got a $50 million and an $86 million proposed increase. To me, adding $140 more million into a plan on 2 projects would play havoc with trying to manage cash flow and manage overall allocation among projects within the city. So help me understand like how that happens, or could this have been reasonably foreseen, or should 100 million of this been factored in the past so we knew what might happen? So I'm still trying to understand when these increases happen, what's a scope increase versus what's estimation softness or changes. But just looking at those 2 projects, that's like a really big number. So help me understand just a little bit more on those. Where did those big numbers come from? And
So
when could we have told council?
Be happy to, Commissioner Stevens. With APRW, this is a new project for us, and we based it on what we currently have at the treatment plant. We actually had a skid where we could serve individuals where we clean up the wastewater to drinking water. And the initial costs were based on that, plus the current permit that we had. Now, DEQ, Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, have finalized new regulations based off that and learning off that skid of what we would need. So we're going to have a different treatment train, multiple redundancies, more online equipment for that. So then we had Corollo help us design that preliminary design plus with a cost estimate of this, what it would cost. And they have come back essentially of 68 million.
So, okay, because my note I put down when you were doing the original explanation was that regulations changed because you needed a new permit. So did the scope of this project not get any bigger, so we're still going to get the same volume of reclaimed water, but now because of regulatory changes, it's going to cost 3 times more?
Because of regulatory changes is one. We have the capacity to do 20 million gallons a day. And the way we're going to use APRW is a blend with the drinking water. So we're looking 10 to 20%. So we only need 5 to 10 million gallons of water that's recycled. So that's going to be a different treatment train on its own.
Okay, so how does something like this work then? Does council evidently originally approved this at 17 million and they knew they'd get this many gallons of water out of it reclaimed. Now it's going to triple and you're going to be presenting this budget to them. Are they going to be provided information to know, hey, to decide, is this still worth doing, or is this something that now becomes not a best use of an extra 50 million?
Short answer, yes. This will be presented to them for their approval.
Okay, so they'll know the scope
Yes.
can change, it costs more, and they can decide whether they want to keep it.
And they'll have a report of
Okay.
what the staff went through and our engineers went through.
And then the wastewater one, that was 80-some million. Was that, was there a scope? I wasn't quite following that as clearly. Was that a scope increase so we get more utility out of something, or was that just
Shrug?
cost increase? Yeah, what was that 80 million roughly?
So that's essentially, we budgeted, this includes the budget out to 2046. That's 5.25 million a year to 2046 because we're part of the sub-regional operating group.
So okay, so it's almost like, in some ways, this is an operating cost because you have to keep contributing to your portion of that in order to keep that thing running.
Yes.
Because the dollar size you're calling it capital, but it's your contribution for the 9.9%
Correct.
ownership interest you have.
Correct.
Okay, so this increase didn't necessarily cause any pain because it just includes a lot more years of utility that you're going to get.
Correct, Commissioner Stevens.
Okay, thank you.
Let me interject with a couple of questions here. or maybe it's just a comment, but go to your first or your second slide, whatever you call it, page number 2, and it's a comment that on that column called Proposed 25 to 30 5-year CIP, I think as a matter of definition, it's really 5 years plus. In other words, it includes everything in the years beyond.
Chairman Smith, yes, it does include some of that.
In some cases, and city staff wants to weigh in. Who's requesting?
Mr. Chairman, that column adopted FY 25 through 29 5-year CIP, and then 2 columns over, FY 26 through 30. Those numbers encompass only the 5-year CIP. Anything beyond that is not contemplated in those columns.
Okay, so it does not include the out-year numbers. I guess I'm still confused. If it doesn't have those future increases, then we're not looking at the total package that they will be adopting. I mean, they'll be adopting these 5 years, but in fact, they're subscribing to a project that may have substantial dollars beyond the 5-year program. I believe that's a true statement. You can correct me if I'm wrong. In some of the presentations, I noticed that you had a project that had an increase of $88 million in the years beyond, and I'm looking for which one that is. Maybe you know which one it is.
I believe that would be the Shrog, Chairman Smith.
And you've made a note on the bottom of the page that 84 million of the proposed budget increase is expected in the years beyond. And on this sheet, therefore, you have the total proposed budget of 158.6, including the 84 million in the years beyond. Is that true?
I would have to defer to you, Scott.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just speak to this to kind of describe our methodology for what we were doing here. On the Excel sheet we were just looking at, that was meant to show the 5-year budgeted costs that will be adopted as part of the 5-year CIP. Now, we wanted to, on the individual project slides, show that, let me back up, so any proposed or planned expenditures beyond the 5 years are not counted in those numbers on the Excel sheet. However, we wanted to show on the individual projects that we are in fact considering and contemplating the long-term cost of the project. So we sought to show the total project cost on these slides, even if many of the expenditures will occur on the out years. That said, in the book, the out years are included under, I think the column is called Future. So they're in your book, they're just not counted in that first spreadsheet that you see at the beginning of each section. I hope that was responsive to your question.
It's a nuance that's probably boring everybody in the audience already, but I see a different approach on page 9 where you have included the out years, and on page 13 where you have not included the out years. And it's
Mr. Chairman, it's possible that this was a very manual process. It's possible that that was missed on an individual project basis, but our intent was to show and portray on the individual project slides all of the costs that are being contemplated even beyond the 5 years.
And so if you turn to page 13, you'll see that that was not the case. So it's a bit confusing to follow. I think it would be helpful for the public as well as council, but for the public to understand the evolution of some of these projects, if we indicated whether previous approved increases, we never seem to have decreases, but previously included increases. And my point is this, going back to the page 2 of the handout, and it's true on each individual sheet as well, you say the proposed capital budget for this coming year, the spend rate for the coming year, column 3, which in total was $323 million. I suspect that the combination of that and the next 5 years and even the years beyond, we've had increases in some of these projects before just the increases that we're displaying in the far right column. In other words, you're saying we're asking for $189 million of increase, but it may be true for many of these projects that they started out at $5, went to 10, then they went to 20, and now we're asking to take it from 20 to 25. A silly example to illustrate my point. It would be, I think, informative for anyone trying to follow the capital budget to understand what approvals have been sought in the past on individual projects and in the aggregate. And that brings us up to where we were last year, and then what are we asking for this year? Commissioner Stevens also made the point that in some cases it seems like an easy answer to say that, you know, this is inflation or it's post-COVID or it's the cost of moving dirt or whatever. But I think we have to be a little bit more disclosive with the public if we accept them, if we expect them to accept these numbers as given. We need to be a little bit more informative as to the root cause of some of the increases. Now I'm going to pause for a minute. The city manager wants to weigh in and tell me why I'm wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly would not do that, but I wanted to contribute to your discussion or monologue that I think one thing after we get through this budget season, we may want to revisit as a group if the 5-year adoption is serving us well versus a 1-year adoption. Case in point, I think some of your comments that you just made there, and I've often seen in this 5-year, what we have is a project that's going to span multiple years, and you never, in your first year or your second year, you never hit it exactly right. So then you have carry forward, and therefore that's going to change the number from what you had originally budgeted in year 2 or 3 or the out years. So it's this constant moving target, and I wonder for tracking and transparency purposes if it might serve us well to have the 1-year adoption and have it fully loaded. And there are pros and cons to the two different approaches. I appreciate that. But some of the challenges that we've had with tying down a number, or the transparency in articulating that, may be solved through a methodology change back to a 1-year adoption. That is what I am more familiar with, and as a new member, still wrapping my head around the 5-year and how that particularly changes from year to year with carry forwards, and how did it change from what was originally adopted. And furthermore, when you look at projects over a 5-year span versus 1 year, there's a tremendous amount of upfront lift and work in refining those numbers, and that may be where that certainty is very challenging in the environment that we're in versus 1 year. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I think you're right. And I do believe that the council focuses on the upcoming 1 year when they're giving you their approval. And the out years are important to see the total anticipated scope of the project. What are we really signing up for if we agree to this spend rate for 25, 26? So probably both numbers are needed. Just perhaps a better explanation of how we got to that point. Turn, if you will, to page 5, and this is the Bartlett Dam project. Our proposed budget is $48 million. You said this is our share. Give me an order of magnitude. What is the total project at whoever's going to do it, the state or federal level or whatever?
As of right now, they're only estimates, and it's ranging from 1 to 3 billion.
Is how much?
1 to 3 billion.
That's a pretty wide range.
And it's still a number of years out.
And is our 48 based on the 1 billion or the 3 billion or something in between?
Chairman Smith, I don't have an answer to that right now, but I can look into that.
The importance of this, it may be unnecessary, and it may be required, and maybe have no option, but it's obviously a project over which we have no discretion. We're not going to go out and build the dam. And so we need to be pretty sure that we're estimating our total future commitment and cost as correctly as we can. Commissioner Newman?
Just a comment regarding go to the project for the sewage treatment plant, the ongoing spend. I forget the slide. The shared facility. There it is.
Let me get back to it.
Yeah.
The shrug?
Nope. Next one. Nope. The one's that one.
Yes.
Okay. I think this is a great example of what we've been talking about in terms of capital replacement, and Treasurer Andrews and I had a conversation about how to categorize this. This might be better categorized as really, this is a long-term capital replacement plan, and it's not really a one-year capital project, because you're going to spend this every year, and eventually you're going to do a big project because you're using it up over time. We have some of the similar things when you have to replace a road, and you could argue is PCI a long-term plan, because you're going to have an ongoing $20, $30 million a year, or a base replacement could fall in that category, or a planned set of those. And it seems like this is kind of what I was talking about when we were saying, hey, it's situational, project by project, but this is a great example. I don't think it really belongs in what you would think is the capital plan. We're building a new capacity facility or whatever. We're just using this up over time, and it needs to be categorized differently. And then that adds up to the wastewater treatment plan capital, but it seems like it would be better separated out that way.
Yeah, Commissioner Newman, that's a good observation, because this is really not a capital project that we capitalize on our books. It's actually a joint venture with the regional group. So we can take a look at that. We have always just considered it a capital project because we use capital funds to fund it, since it's a regional capital project.
Right.
And yeah. So good observation, though. Thank you.
Thank you. And one other comment, in terms of the cash flow on these projects, it seems like our policies are a bit constraining for the folks that are trying to do these projects very efficiently, or as efficiently as possible. And the council approves a one-year plan, but tentativeness on a multi-year project is difficult for the people doing the work. It seems like we ought to be approving a project and movement of cash flow within that without having to go back to the council, maybe the city manager approval with just communicate to the council. But it seems like within a project, you know what the budget's going to be. You're not going to go over that, but cash flows happen. Equipment's delayed, it comes in early, whatever. There's unexpected things. If there's unexpected things, you have to get approval for that from contingency. But I think there's enough constraints on it, but maybe the constraints are so much that it inhibits. And I'd be interested in your comments if you think that that stands in the way of your ability to move projects forward because of the administrative burden that goes with it.
Commissioner, it would be nice to have that. The way I understand your question is have that approval and the funding there as the project starts, so we can continue the project without getting further approvals or just scheduling at certain years to get that cash flow, because it does improve efficiency. Some projects will, with long lead times, we'll go ahead and get, as the project starts, order those first, work with our construction managers and get those long lead times moving first, instead of waiting, to a certain point and saying, okay, let's go ahead and order it now. So that is an added benefit, yes.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Schweikert.
Yeah, your slide 9 that's up there, that slide is actually why I got involved in politics many years ago when my former town of Paradise Valley got into a disagreement with Scottsdale on what the future needs were going to be. And I think it's important for everybody to know that, and they may have changed it since I was involved, but it used to be that they were expanding that facility every 7 years. So they would go out to all the different communities and say, what are your perceived increased needs for the next 7 years? And then they would design it that way. And they always, because I spent 6 years on MAG as an East Valley representative, and they'd always design some flexibility into that because, if you look at the growth of the valley, It's hard to project 7 years down the road what it's going to be, but it takes them that long to design and build out that water treatment plant. So that's a number that I mean, it looks like a huge number increase there. I'm not particularly surprised about that.
Good to know.
I'll follow up with one other question, or a couple of them. And by the way, I apologize to you already, Kevin, and this is the advantage or disadvantage of being number one out of the box here. So many of these questions will be germane to the other presentations, but you just had the lucky number one to answer it for your presentation. But the question deals with when you have an increase in cost that you perceive on a project, do you also increase the other components of the project that were in the original estimate? For example, the overhead, the contingency, those kinds of adders that gave us the original estimate. Do they go up in tandem with the increases that you perceive in the underlying basic materials and labor?
Chairman Smith, to my knowledge, no. We look at the increased cost, if it's materials or labor, and look to see where available funding can cover it, and we cover that.
And another question, which I don't mean to be facetious about this, but seriously, does a project in your area or anybody's area ever come in under budget? Do we ever have a champagne celebration for a project that came in below expected cost?
Chairman Smith, I'll only speak for water. They typically they vary from double to 5 times the cost, and they never come in under. And we do work with engineering consultants to get engineering estimates, and they struggle with it too. It's not uncommon to have someone quote materials, and they'll hold it for 2 to 10 days, no more 30, 60 days. If you get something 30 days, that's where we do a champagne toast.
Well, invite us all to one of those if you will.
Will do.
And maybe the other speakers can talk to that question too, of whether any of their projects, and I don't know what happens to the money if it comes in at $50 and we thought it was going to be 100, what do we do with the other 50? Where does it go?
Well, one thing I do want to say, Chairman Smith, we do work with a lot of other utilities, even developers, and the developers I met with this week, they saw a pricing from 2023 go from 12 million to 40 million today. And they're asking us if we're seeing the same, and we are.
Commissioner Stevens?
Yeah, I guess Commissioner Newman got me going on the slide 9 too. It makes it sound like it's a little more of an operating type thing. So I'm curious, if it was it's an enterprise fund, if it goes into operations, the reimbursement's got to come from rates anyway, so are we just pushing on a balloon because if we made it operating, it would move to operating and then the funding source would move from one portion of the enterprise fund allocation of rate revenue into, from an operating to a capital part, or is there some reason to think there's a more correct presentation by having it as operating? Okay, so I guess the question for you would be, is this truly capital because your share of assets are increasing in value and it doesn't happen ratably over a period, or is it more your share of costs which could reasonably be expected to be incurred every year that's not more operating?
Just for clarification, Commissioner Stevens, this is for the SHROG,
What's
correct?
that?
This is for SHROG or just in general?
No, I'm talking about this,
The SHROG? So
yeah,
this would
SHROG.
be purely capital. This would be replacement of buildings and equipment at 91st Avenue.
So it's ratable, it's a big 1 year, smaller the next, depending on whatever the capital plan is?
Correct.
Okay.
Commissioner Stevens, I'm going to interrupt you here because somebody on the city staff level wants to chime in.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to respond to your question earlier. What happens if a project comes in under budget? If I have a project that ends, let's say, $1 million under budget, that $1 million is reverted back to the fund of origin that funded the project.
Thank you for that clarification. Commissioner Stevens, you still have the floor if you'd like.
No, that's okay.
Then Commissioner Ransko.
Quick question. Can you comment about what percentage of your projects are denied or not approved? I'd be curious if any of them ever are.
Commissioner Ransco, don't have a number for that. We are very sensitive to what projects we believe. We come to what we need, not a want. It's a need of, yeah, don't have an answer for that.
If I may assist, Mr. Chair and Commissioner, a little more familiar with this capital portion as it was part of my portfolio over the last year before my new role. I would say in water and primarily in infrastructure, we talked quite a bit about this yesterday with transportation. I would probably put them in two categories. One would be expansion to keep up with growth, and in that regard, that has been a significant portion of what Water Resources has been dealing with. And then as Mr. Rose referenced, the second portion is rehabilitation. I think it also translates to roads, as we were discussing yesterday. A newer community is going to have a different PCI than an older community. And so I think you're seeing our community in that transition, and we have both. And so to denied, I think it's a matter of prioritization. So the answer is yes. Absolutely, projects were denied. I would call them, I probably wouldn't use that term though, I would just say that they were deferred, not in the deferred sense of kind of how this commission has said that other term, but I would say just prioritized, and it's just not of the highest priorities given cash flow, given where we are with other priorities, particularly with growth and also, quite frankly, switching the portfolio. I mean, what you have here is a dramatic shift from CAP water to these alternatives, and I would present them as an option for future consideration by elected officials. So that has taken an enormous amount of resources, innovation, like we were talking APWR, and truly on the cutting edge of technology. And so there's no way to predict that type of actual cost down to the dollar amount because we're the first, we're the pioneers, we're the first ones doing it. So again, I think you have growth, you have us diversifying the water portfolio, and then you have rehabilitating an aging system.
Let me address the city manager with a question, since you brought up the practice of prioritization, and I know that's a reality. You try to figure out what's the highest and best need and response. In what way is this prioritization responsive to what the public may want, I'll say? And let me say as an example, we discussed at a recent meeting the I'll call it the neglect or the low prioritization that was given to roads and the condition of streets and so on, and now we've got some catch-up work to do.
Right.
But was there anybody or any square in the process that somebody could say, wait, you know, a higher priority than horse barns is pothole repairs or whatever? Explain that process.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I recognized, and some of my colleagues also recognized, that after the discussion the other day about how a capital project becomes, how an idea or concept becomes a capital project, given time we had to glaze over that. It's still in your deck. But what we also added, and we weren't able to do it within the 24-hour timeline, but we were able to add a couple additional elements that I think are illustrative for this discussion. Oh, it's not touchscreen. It's just not touchscreen. How do we not have it? And so, thank you so much. And so, I think it's really important. We'll provide this as a follow-up slide for the Commission's consideration, but do know that how we select projects is based upon a variety of things. One, in many instances, it's other plans that are driving that. I say we get community feedback every single day, and then also we have other outreach opportunities, and then we have selective groups throughout our organization that prioritize. Sometimes it's safety that will drive. I'll give a good example in Parks and Recreation. They make the playgrounds very different today than they did 30 years ago. It's amazing we survived those 30 or 40 years ago. And so it's things such as that are a part of the replacement, and quite frankly are dangerous to our community if we don't. So there's that element that factors in. And then sometimes some project or something has really bubbled up to be a maintenance problem, and then you have to come in and address that. So it's kind of a cost savings measure in that regard. All of that comes into consideration as we prepare these, and there are hundreds of items that are on a list. And then I will say, again, back to government funding and fund accounting, is PCI for the most part, or pavements, given our funding sources, wouldn't necessarily, well, I'll use this pure example, wouldn't compare with any of the projects you just saw, and to state an extreme example of different funding measures because of our funding sources. So we really look at them within each revenue opportunity, but then those do compete within that same category. And the largest category, other than the enterprises, of course, is the general fund. And so these are challenged because of our discussion the other day also, where you have tremendous upward pressure for increasing costs in the general fund on the operating side. So it's our job to constantly put downward pressure on that, which creates additional opportunities to fund a needs list of a general fund, not a wants list. I'll stop there. We'll provide those additional slides for your edification. Look forward to further conversation in that regard.
Thank you for the explanation. And Kevin, thank you for your presentation and for your patience in being number one out of the box here.
Thank you.
Unless we have other comments on the water and water reclamation projects, and I guess I should say, just as an overview, if anybody's watching from TV land and doesn't understand this, for the most part, I mean, this is a big, big part of the capital program for the city, is the money spent in water and water reclamation projects. And for the most part, they are recovered through rates and fees. So it's not a tax-related issue, but it's these are projects over in the enterprise fund of the water company, and certainly a company that I think we're all proud of. Every time you turn on the faucet, you have a lot to be thankful for in terms of what these folks are doing. But as an order of magnitude, I think their total spend here in next year is requested to be something like $330 million. And as I say, out of the total budget, that's a big chunk of what we're going to be doing. Unless there's other comments, we'll move on to item 2 on the agenda, which is the drainage, flood, and capital control projects. Same kind of format, and Hassan, I'll have you introduce yourself, and you are going to tell us all about this.
Chairman Smith, Vice Chair Schweiker, members of the Commission, my name is Hassan Mushtaq. Good afternoon. Stormwater Engineering Manager and Floodplain Administrator. Today I will be presenting information on the Stormwater CIP budget for FY 25-26. I promise I won't speak in billions, and I won't have 12 slides. It'll be short and sweet. The proposed Stormwater CIP budget has a total of 22 items, which includes existing projects and few new proposed projects. They are small and large in capacities in various ways. Next slide, please. This is a summary of the 25-26 CIP and the 5-year CIP as well. If you have any questions, I'm sure Scott will jump in to answer those. I won't speak to any of these numbers. However, I'll move on with my presentation. As requested earlier, I will be highlighting 2 stormwater flood control projects for your information today from the proposed budget for 25-26. Next slide, please. First one is Riata Wash Flood Control Project. This is a project that will build a new channel, enhance existing channels built by developers, construct several roadway crossings, certify 2 levees built by others between Pinnacle Peak Road to the north and Central Arizona Project Canal to the south. Design of this project is at 30% level. Requested budget for FY 25-26 is approximately $400,000 to complete the 30% level design and the FEMA process. Total project cost is almost $60 million. However, we are anticipating half of the cost share will come from Flood Control District of Maricopa County through intergovernmental agreements between us and the Flood Control District. Majority of this $60 million is budgeted outside the current 5-year plan in the outer years. Once completed, this channel will contain the 100-year flood in the area, reducing the large Riata Wash floodplain, and the floodplain is depicted in the light greenish color in the entire watershed. The channel location, it's a little difficult to see, but it's hugging the eastern edge of the watershed boundary. Once that is built, this large floodplain will be removed from the map. What that does is approximately 4,600 structures will no longer be in this floodplain, and the mandatory flood insurance requirement will not be applicable anymore. These flood insurance policy premiums could be as high as $3,000 depending on the contents in the structure. Next slide, please. Next project up is Granite Reef Wash Phase 2B. We engineers like to name things with numbers. This is a project primarily will build storm drains, open channels, enhance retrofit a detention basin, Pima Park along Thomas Road, several roadway crossings, etc. From Thomas Road, following the 87th Street alignment, down to Granite Reef Road alignment, all the way down to McKellips Road to the south. The elements color-coded on the picture you see on the north, the purple color is the storm drains and the retention basin. The light blue color coming at an angle, 87th Street alignment, storm drains and channels. The green color is also storm drains and channels following Granite Reef Road. And finally confluencing with another project coming from the east side, eventually discharging into the Salt River. Design of this project is at 60% level. Requested budget for 25-26 is approximately $5.4 million. Overall project cost is about $41 million total, and the remaining construction dollars are spread over the next 2 fiscal years, 26-27 and 27-28. Once again, this is also going to be a cost-share project with the Flood Control District of Maricopa County at 50-50 cost-share level. This project, when it's completed, also will reduce the Granite Reef floodplain. It is not shown on this exhibit. However, it is, if you can imagine, the light blue color line and the green color line is all floodplains on the map as of today. Once completed, the project will shrink the floodplain to the storm drain and the street rights-of-way only. This project will remove approximately 600 structures from the existing floodplain. Again, the benefit to the citizens would be removal of the mandatory flood insurance requirement, which could be pretty high, $2,000 to $3,000 based on the contents coverage. As I promised, my presentation would be short. That was the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I would like to entertain them, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Hassan. And to the public at large, Nick Molinari's presentation was all about water we can control, and Hassan's is about water we can't control, but we try to. It's an important part of our livability, if you will, but only appreciated in times of 100-year floods and that sort of thing. So it's important what we're doing. Let me ask you, Nick, who determines the need for a project? Is it done by you, by Scottsdale, or is it done by Maricopa Flood Control District, or jointly, or who drives this process that says this is a project we ought to attend to?
Chairman Smith and members of the commission, the project starts, any project in flood control area starts with the citizens themselves. We get complaints, drainage complaints, flooding complaints when storm happens from different parts of the city, and we keep a track of that. So we know what parts of city are vulnerable for flooding, and we have to come up with mitigation for those areas. When a concept develops, we start corresponding with our partners, Flood Control District of Maricopa County, and look for funding opportunities and so forth. So that's how we pretty much start any and all of these projects you see under the Stormwater CIP funds.
Is the funding from the Flood Control District limited as to dollar amount total that they'll allocate to Scottsdale? Or if we came up with $1 billion worth of projects, would they be right there with us with $1 billion from their coffers? Or?
Chairman Smith, members of the commission, it's not capped by any means, but it's based on needs. Maricopa County looks at the needs for other agencies, other communities within the Maricopa County as well, and they prioritize whose projects are more priority than others, and that's how they allocate their funding. I don't know offhand if there is a hard cap on any of the funding limits.
But the word priority enters the equation again. We'll probably hear more of that in the future. Commissioner Stevens.
Yes, just so you all know what I did, several of my questions I submitted in advance, kind of hoping they'd be able to make things go better. So I did try to do that. Slide 2, I'd just like to point, probably shouldn't be relied on because it's still directionally incorrect on the proposed increases. That says decreases, and they're significantly larger in the other direction. This slide was really meant to be an overview so you knew what to focus on. And then my other question was on slide 4. Well, I guess on slide 3, I'm still not sure what that big increase was for. And my question on slide 4 was that thing's been around since 2017, only $2 million expended to date. And now we're going up by, oh, I'm sorry, I read that wrong. I got my two projects confused. Let me go back to page 3 on project FB55. You've got a proposed budget increase of $35 million happening on a project that's only had a couple million incurred to date, so that's a really big increase. What was that again? Is that, that's like oh my gosh, that's an 8-year-old project. So why all of a sudden $35 million more?
Commissioner Stevens, members of the commission, thank you for the question. Again, priority is always a factor. When we're dealing with projects, there is competition between projects, which one gets priority to be designed and built before others and so forth. This project was not a priority project because of which the design was a little slower, and we've been working on this design since 2017. However, now we have progressed to 30% plus stage of the design. Increase of the cost is always a moving target. As the city manager alluded a few minutes ago, that estimates are always the target. 2 years later, the cost will be different. And at different milestones of completion of design project, we get estimates done by the consultant and our own estimators. So at 15% level, the number will be 30 million. 30% level, the number will be different. Increase might be varieties of items, additional construction items, scope increase, inflation, for example, may play a part in the increase. If you'd like more details, I can find details talking to the project management folks and bring it back to the commission at a later time.
I don't know, and just throughout this process, there have been an awful lot of really
Commissioner Stevens, let me interrupt you because I've got city staff. They may be weighing in on this question as well.
Yeah, Commissioner Stevens and Commission, with the Stormwater Fund, we are dependent on the collection of the stormwater fee to schedule out how much is available each year for the projects. So we don't issue debt for the Stormwater Fund because the revenue streams are not strong enough to support debt, or only a small amount of debt, I would say. And also is dependent on our intergovernmental agreement with the flood control district. So with the stormwater projects, a lot of times we have to schedule that in the sense that when we have the collection of the stormwater revenues, then we can do this much. And we have to push, either a second phase or a next portion of the expenditure to another year. So that's kind of how we manage the stormwater projects in the Stormwater Fund.
Okay, but still my big picture question is this project more than doubled all of a sudden out of the blue, regardless of whether you had funds, so either we weren't watching it that much and now it became more important, so we're looking at it now. And I'm just trying to think about how you run a business if you've got this, these kind of big changes popping up all the time when it comes to allocation of resources. And does more time need to be spent, or do we need to look at what the process is for doing the estimates on these projects?
Sorry, Commissioner. So I think that with some of these projects, additional improvements are added on as more project needs are identified. And so this is one of those projects where it could be a variety of issues, whether it is additional scope increase or inflation or having to defer the project because we don't have the stormwater fee revenues to fund it. So whenever we have to push the project to a future year, the cost does increase. So there's a combination of factors but I think Hassan will have to speak to this specific project and what was added in terms of scope and what the inflation cost increases were.
And someone else is asking to speak from city staff.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Stevens, I wanted to try to address the question you asked earlier about slide 2. Kind of talked about it earlier. If you go to the previous slide, what we were trying to compare on that table are total 5-year expenditures in last year's CIP and the 5-year and the proposed. So what the figure on the right, that negative 31.8 million, shows is that if you compare the total 5-year project cost from last year's CIP to this year's, you would see a net decrease of $31.8 million. Now, I mentioned this earlier, one thing we kind of grappled with internally is how to account for expenditures outside of the 5-year window. So this project, Riata, if you could go to the next slide, is a great example of that. If you look at last year's CIP book on page 118, the overall project is expected to be $24.3 million, and all of it was scheduled to occur within the 5-year window. Now, if you look at page 40 of the proposed CIP with the blue cover on it, you'll see that the overall project is now expected to cost $59.8, which you see on the slide, but most of it is scheduled to occur in that future column off to the right, meaning it's outside of the 5-year window that we're comparing on the previous slide. So what we tried to do in those cases is to have the Excel table compare only 5-year costs, but to have the individual project slides communicate the entire project cost, even if it's scheduled to occur outside of the 5-year window. There's critiques you can make with that methodology. That's just what we tried to do, and we could provide a crosswalk or slice the numbers any way you'd like to make it useful to you. Thanks.
Commissioner Ransko.
I was just looking at the Granite Reef Wash project. This is an incredibly mature neighborhood. Those are 40, 50-year-old houses in here. So I was just curious if they've been flooding that long, or is this deteriorating infrastructure that we're repairing, or is it upstream contribution that's overwhelming legacy engineering?
Commissioner Ransko, members of the commission, thank you for the question. It's all of the above. Improvements and developments upstream always cause some adverse impact on the downstream direction. We try to mitigate that during the development process. Infrastructure-wise, 87th Street alignment, I believe it's the next slide. 87th Street alignment, the light blue color, it has no storm drains. The street itself is built as an invert, so it carries the flow, and in the process it floods side streets, homes, and so forth. I have collected flooding complaints from this area on and off very frequently during a large storm event all the time.
Hassan, I think we've run out of questions to ask you. If you have no additional answers to, we'll...
I'll be happy to take care of any more. If you have more questions, I can answer later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 3 is the McDowell-Sonoran Preserve capital projects. And Nick Molinari, who's the Senior Director of Parks and Recreation and Preserve, and who knows what else, is going to make this presentation. Nick, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair Smith, Vice Chair Schweiker, members of the Budget Review Commission. Again, I'm Nick Molinari. I am the Senior Director who oversees the Parks and Recreation Division and the Preserve. The following slides are an overview of the proposed projects in the Preserve, which are all funded through the 2004 0.15% sales tax that is restricted for land acquisition and capital. These 3 projects that I'll review, in addition to the other projects that are funded through this funding source, have all been recommended by the McDowell-Sonoran Preserve Commission, which serves as the oversight body for that 2004 preserve tax. Next slide, please. This is the 5-year plans as compared is not necessarily significant as we speak to this, and we can certainly revert back to this if we'd like to as we go over the projects. Next slide, please. The Gateway Trailhead improvements are a 3-year project that will improve safety conditions, increase shade throughout the trailheads, and improve storage and restrooms. It will update the trailhead conditions, the parking lots, and the trails. This is a $4.5 million project with $1.5 million budgeted in the fiscal year 25-26 budget, and then another 1.5 in the following 2 fiscal years. Next slide, please. The Tom's Thumb trailhead improvements are a little bit more, there's a little bit more to the Tom's Head trailhead improvements. This project includes implementation of a permanent wastewater solution for this trailhead and a connection to the domestic water system. It converts the restrooms to flushing toilets, which our visitors do not love the condition of the restrooms right now. It creates some drainage refinements and updates to all of the signage and resurfacing of the equestrian lot. Currently, those toilets are not tied to the sewer system, so they are chutes and similar to campground toilets. So our visitors do not love those. When Tom's Thumb was built, we were the first development out there, and there wasn't anything else there. So we knew that future development was coming, and we installed water infrastructure that could connect to a wastewater system in the future, which this project will satisfy. Next slide. So the Rio Verde overpass. This project, the funding for this project, which is in total $35 million, starts in fiscal year 27-28. This project will fund the design and construction of a wildlife crossing over Rio Verde Drive to assure safe passage of wildlife over the expanded roadway. The overpass will restore critical wildlife connectivity within the McDowell-Sonoran Preserve, link the preserve to the Tano National Forest, and the Rio Verde Drive as an arterial roadway with a 50-mile-an-hour speed limit bisects key wildlife linkage corridor. The project will consider north-south crossing for hikers, bikers, horseback riders, and other pedestrians, in addition to mitigating the risk of high-speed vehicular collisions. The proposed project, which has not seen any design to this point, is a 200-foot wide vegetated crossing that will be strategically integrated into the surrounding topography to ensure natural movement patterns for wildlife. We anticipate that fencing would be installed along the Rio Verde Drive that would guide animals towards the crossing and reduce roadway hazards. This project does align with Scottsdale's voter-approved general plan, which prioritizes wildlife connectivity, habitat preservation, in the open space, land use, recreation, environmental, and planning and conservation elements. And I'm happy to take any questions about any of these projects.
Thank you, Nick. I don't have any requests to speak right now, but I will make a comment. You show the source of funding for many of these as being the Preserve Tax 2004 hyphen or dash land and improvements. And I think you may want to expand that definition some. I mean, just acknowledging that in 2018, the voters approved a severe limitation on the spending of the Preserve Tax 2004. So we are probably more affected by that limitation than we are by the broad language of the original 2004 tax passage. And to that point, the 2018 limitation, which is then, once it was approved by the voters, it was incorporated in the charter, the city charter, so it's in our constitution, but it limits the use of the money to trails and trail improvements, maintenance of the trails. Maybe maintenance is equivalent in everybody's mind to improvements, I don't know, but it's a nuanced word. And so you might make an argument or talk about the argument of why are these still legally possible, all of these things that we're calling improvements. I presume it's your position that those are, in accordance with the 2008 language, those are trail maintenance. Would that be your explanation?
Chair Smith, members of the commission, we would consider those trailhead improvements to be in alignment with the 2018 revision, correct? That's what you're referring to?
That's what I'm referring to, which allows for the spending of the money for maintenance of trails.
These trails are all already, they're existing trails, so the improvements that we're recommending to these trails would be considered maintenance or improvements to those existing assets.
And similarly with the land bridge or the animal bridge, whatever name you give to it, that you would consider to be maintenance of an existing trail or creation of a new trail, or how would you fit that into the language?
Chair Smith, members of the commission, I don't have a reference to the 2018 language in front of me as it relates to that ordinance, so I would need to bring that information back to you in the commission.
You may, and it may just be something that you take to the council as explanation, but that obviously the 2018 language is the governing language, not the broad language of 2004 that said improvements there too. Now I have some other folks that'd like to chime in. Commissioner Newman.
Could you put up slide 5, please? Yeah, that's the one. The land bridge project.
Slide 5, please.
Yeah. We've been having a thoughtful discussion, Commissioner Carla and Steve Coluccio and I, and so I appreciate the discussion. It's been thoughtful and informative. And there's kind of a disconnect here, and I wonder if this is a bit administrative. To have this as a standalone project, it's a big number, you know, and there are other projects out there that are big numbers too. And I'm not intending to get into the details of the project, but administratively, there's also going to be at some point a road widening that's just off the planning horizon right now for the widening of Rio Verde Drive. And just intuitively, and having done some research on it, the costs change dramatically if considerations like this are incorporated into a road, another bigger design project. So my question is to city staff, I'm not sure who should answer, but it seems like we ought to have some discussion there to do that, because it just makes sense, and I think we kind of have some agreement that administratively there isn't a pathway to really do that right now. So this is the solution right now until the administrative thing, and we kind of control the administrative part, I hope. And so maybe we can come up with some kind of reasonable, common sense solution here.
City manager wants to chime in probably on this point, so let's defer to him for a moment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll take that on. So I think you raise a good point, and when I look at the start date, it's fascinating to me of July 27th, and again, it goes back to the 5-year versus the single year. So what we have in the concept, what you have pointed out, is 2 projects. Both are in the future. This is before you today, if you will, and before council because it's within the 5-year. Then we have another project that is on a different timeline potentially, and then how do those 2 mix? And I think talking about it in the future makes it even more challenging, and again, having this discussion here when it doesn't even start until 2027. And then should the other project move forward at least a relatively close time frame, it certainly would make sense from a mobilization standpoint to do that all at the same time. It's clearly 2 different funding sources, but there's significant efficiencies to be gained through that combined one-time construction, if you will. We certainly recognize that. I think that sounds like a win-win should those parallel projects come to fruition at any close proximity. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't know, Commissioner Smith, what we do here around that other than I think it's a reasonable approach just administratively to approach it that way, but to me it would obviously change what this slide looks like dramatically, and I think that helps a lot of the discussion overall going forward with this.
Commissioner Newman, that's a great point, and the out-year schedule for this project in 27-28 as the design year does allow for some opportunity for alignment with future transportation projects.
Commissioner Carla?
Yes. I'll take a couple of things in a row. First off, what Chair Smith was talking about the 2018 vote that limited the ability to do certain things in the preserve. It's called Prop 420. This overpass still qualifies because it has a trail over it and because it's been in the plan since 2017. And on the record, the authors of Prop 420 said that they put in Section B1 specifically to allow things like this. So if city legal is going to follow up on that, just FYI, that is what they have said on the record, that Section B1 is in there to cover this project. And then to go to Commissioner Newman, and we sincerely appreciate the interest and study he has put into this. And I'm not sure if we're at the same place yet on everything, but when it does come to combining the widening of Rio Verde to 4 lanes and building the long-planned overpass, it makes no sense not to do them together. But watching Transportation's presentation day before yesterday, it's not even on their sight line. And I just want to remind the city manager, when you're talking to Transportation, that the preserve's been waiting 20 years for this because the public first voted and approved it in the plan in 2004. And we've been waiting for that ultimate widening of Rio Verde. And while you wait those 2 decades, now as more and more developments coming in, as you saw from the shot that Mr. Zekias showed, the deer are starting not to travel. And in order to have a healthy deer population in the southern part of our preserve, they have to travel to the Tonto. There has to be movement for gene diversity. And that's starting not to happen over these 20 years. And I know that Commissioner Newman still may have a question, and some council members have a question about the need for the overpass. And what I would ask, the chairman here and staff for direction on is, do we need to have a future agenda item to actually discuss that here, or is that something that needs to happen at council? because the Arizona Game and Fish Department Wildlife Connectivity Specialist, he is willing to come in and give a current presentation. Arizona Game and Fish has a contract with the city where they do a yearly helicopter flyover and animal count in the preserve, deer and javelina, and they say our deer population is extremely stable, and so we want to keep it stable and healthy. Plus, they do a collaring study, which I'm not sure how often that is, that tracks the movement. So they have all of this information that they could come and bring in and give a presentation to whichever entity is appropriate to show the absolute need for this to keep our preserve healthy for generations to come. And then on the other part, to not do it, what would be the effect of that? And they can tell us that as well. So I guess I would ask, are we still looking at discussing that in this group, or is that something that is going to get punted to council? My preference is, because this is, as you've rightfully said, such a big number in the budget, maybe I think we should make a recommendation to council related to this, that number one says, let's get transportation off the dime and combine the two before we're negatively affecting the fauna in the southern part of the preserve to the point where it can't be fixed. You know, and for those of you out there listening who don't know this, the Phoenix Mountain Preserve, which is cut up by roads, it's dead. It is biologically dead. You will not have big mammals anymore. You will have scavenger species. We do not want the McDowells to be like that. You know, not from a we owe it to future generations standpoint, from a tourism standpoint, whichever standpoint you want, the promise made to the citizens in both the 1995 and 2004 and also 2021 general plan approval. That's all the times the citizens have voted on this, and we have promised them that this will be healthy and filled with this wonderful wildlife and, you know, flora and fauna for future generations. That's what they voted for. And the reason I know that is every single poll that was done in relation to the preserve since 1992, the number one reason the citizens vote for this is to protect the wildlife. It's indisputable. That's why they vote for it. So I would ask the chair or Commissioner Newman, do we want to have a future agenda item to verify the need of this and to talk about a recommendation to council to make sure this goes in a way that's forward in a way that saves us money as a city?
I will answer the question in a moment, but I'll defer to the city manager who wants to probably give an opinion on the...
Mr. Chair, thank you. At the risk of jumping into what may be a hot topic, and I'm clearly at the 11:30 hour on this, coming late to the discussion, I think the concept of having experts come in to verify or lack of verify projects that we are presenting is probably a slippery slope, because we're not going to bring in somebody on the water or transportation that we've been presenting. So I might caution against that piece. As recommended, we're submitting this project for 25-26 budget, and then it comes back to the scope of the BRC, which as we're nearing the goal line here, what are you going to deliver? That's up to debate on how you package your recommendations, but I didn't anticipate receiving feedback, therefore we remove an item. And I don't know that that was suggested, but just the way the mechanics. So then this could be of question to the group, and if it's of question to the group, it's your prerogative to certainly pass that along in some type of recommendation to City Council. That I just wanted to kind of distinguish a couple points there. It's presented, and then is it a recommendation to find efficiencies? You know, that's in point well taken there, or is it a recommendation to removal or for removal? And I'm not suggesting that was those are two very different things, of course. And so be mindful of, just thoughtful of how we kind of get to the finish line here and what's recommended, and, but it's in as we see it at this point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, City Manager. And I have several people who may have an opinion on this. I'll share mine, and then we'll hear from everybody. I do not believe that it is within the purview of our commission to look at an individual project and determine its merits. I don't think we're not elected officials, so we're not attuned to the public in that regard, and we're not professionals that have been chosen for looking at a project like the Reserve Commission members are. And we're not, like city staff, spending our days thinking about these things. So I interpret the responsibilities of our Budget Review Commission probably more narrowly. We are supposed to advise the council on the budget, and this is certainly one project of many in that budget. And our advice to them may be, in a generic sense, to consider reductions in the overall capital budget or increases, whichever it may be. We may actually, we may even introduce the question that I raised at a moment, just asking council to verify that this is a project within the four corners of the language of the 2018 ballot language that made it into the city charter. So we may have some, I hesitate to call them precautionary notes to the council, but this will be our advice to the council in several respects in a generic sense. So, but to have somebody come in and talk about this project in a special meeting, it is my opinion that's beyond the scope of the Budget Review Commission. And now I will defer to my Vice Chair, Mr. Schweiker.
Yeah, Nick, you just tossed one thing off real quickly, but I think it's kind of important to look at. When you were talking about Tom Thumb and the fact that you're going to upgrade the toilets and that they're going to connect to the sewer lines, I think that's an example, and I think it's important for people to know that when the city plans projects, they do look into the future. You know, you put in those connector lines even though there was nothing to connect them to, because I think that's an example of the way that you look out in the future and see what's going on in the community and development around there. So I think that's an important thing for people to know, that, that you are being proactive and not just reactive when these things come up.
Commissioner Newman.
Thank you. I've spent some time on this, and thank you, Commissioner Carla and Steve, and it's made me think more deeply about these things. This is where the design and decisions and things like that, I don't want to get into design of these things, and I agree with that's not our purview, but policy, I think, is whether, you know, if you've got something that's very large that affects the way, because the alternative is to pay off debt and things like that with the preserve monies, okay? So those are all decisions there, and I don't know where the line is on that, but maybe the solution is a subcommittee discussion where you can have that discussion and have a forum around that. That's possible. I don't think you want to debate this out at council. It becomes a very hot issue, and I don't think you get to facts in that type of discussion very much in that. So maybe a more quiet, thoughtful discussion like we've been having it's been useful. Now, I'm on the side of, okay, how much do you spend on these things? A 200-foot white bridge would be one of the largest in Arizona. I'm not sure the data that we've talked about supports that, but I'm not going to get into design right now. And I'm open to Arizona Game and Fish coming in and talking. I've been listening through this, but a 200-foot wide compared to others in Arizona, that would be a big investment. It also the project kind of presupposes the outcome, land versus culverts, things like that, and other solutions. A north-south access across the road, when you widen it, I can see with hikers, horseback riders, and animals, all of those things. I think there's a strong argument there for doing something. I just don't want to presuppose the argument there, and I think we can be thoughtful about that in the proper forum, but at some point it becomes a solution versus policy decision in terms of how our money, and I think that is relevant to give guidance to council on that as to what should be the priority, especially when, if it was a $3 million project, I don't think we'd be having this discussion. And I think other solutions might lead you to something similar to that. And so maybe that goes away because of that subcommittee type of discussion. But at some point, if it's a 35, 40, maybe the time we get done, it's a $50 million decision, I think it becomes a much tougher policy decision, and I think that does become relevant for the committee. So that's just how I'm thinking about that. And I appreciate city staff's flexibility to say, hey, we do have some competing projects here. There may be some practical things to do here to combine that and come up with a solution that works for everybody. I'm not against what you're proposing and things. I think some of the solutions get pretty expensive, and I think you have to really think about that relative to other decisions that taxpayers would expect us to use the money for. Thank you.
Commissioner Stevens?
Yeah, I'm probably the least up to speed on this particular project of anyone in the room, but I guess what I'd like to share is, to me, it seems like when we're looking at things, I'm taking the position that we assume the city's looked at projects and decided this is the best way to do it. So, for example, somebody's already decided it's better to have animals walking over a bridge than under a bridge or through a tunnel in order to make it work. And so it seems like our job would then be, what's the most cost-effective way in which that should be executed? And rather than have a separate meeting and spend a lot of time that I know is a hot-button item that's going to be dealt with elsewhere, probably by council, my thought is that maybe our recommendation ends up being whatever you think it should be in our final report. What we say with respect to this project, we recommend that council consider whether the cost approach at $35 million is a cost-effective, good way to do it, or whether other alternatives should be pursued. That's what I plan on doing on the earlier one on water purification, that they used to call something else, I think. They used to call it toilet to tap, didn't they? And the water purification one, because in that one, that's a big number. That's 50 million. So I'm going to be proposing that a recommendation be made to council that they understand that there's no scope increase to that project, and recommend whether they do a cost-benefit assessment as to whether that project should move forward. So that's an option you could do rather than take more of our time with a separate agenda item.
Commissioner Carla?
I understand that, and that's something worth looking at. My only concern is that we leave this placeholder in the budget, because that's important. I do not want to see something that's been in the plan since 1997 come out of the budget, and say, well, after we do design and we look at it, then we'll put something back in. You're right. This is probably not the actual figure. It could be lower, it could be more, and it all comes down to design. But in order to get to design, hopefully in coordination with transportation, we need to leave it in the budget. We need to leave this plan in the budget. So I'm open to what you're talking about. It's just as long as we keep the placeholder in the budget and we recommend that to council. My only concern is that a recommendation is made without us having all the most up-to-date knowledge. And so if there is any chance this group is looking at saying to council, let's take it out of the budget, then you're right, that will be contentious, because you don't have the latest data, which clearly shows that it needs to stay in the budget if we're going to have a healthy preserve. So I did bring a couple of handouts, and she'll just put them up on the Elmo for us. And these are for staff. There's 4 of each for the staff table. And I'll pass them down to the commissioners. And when she puts them up, I'll tell you what they are. It's just in case we're not going to have this. Oops, I gave 6 there and 4 here. It's backwards, but that's okay. Brad and I already have them. This follows up with Chairman Coluccio's presentation, and all we really want you to see from this is this has been in the plan since 1997. It's been voted on by the citizens in 2004 and voted on by them again in 2021 in the approval of General Plan 2035. And just every iteration of council and the Preserve Commission have accepted and kept this in the plan. You can go to the second sheet. And then the fact, and some research from Game and Fish on this one, and I'm not going to go into all of it, but it's just for you all to take home and read and learn about if you're not going to have a presentation from Game and Fish. And then again, it ends with the fact that every public opinion poll related to the preserve says protecting the wildlife is the #1 thing the voters want. And we've spent over $1 billion on our preserve, and to not do one of the very final pieces of it, to me, makes no sense. And it's, you know, you're not keeping your promise to the citizens. We can go on to the next one. And this is from Arizona Game and Fish Department. They did a two-pager. This is about the importance of wildlife overpasses for connectivity. And this is based on the one that opened down by Oro Valley over 6 lanes in 2016. And they've studied, and it was a combo of an overpass and an underpass. And they've studied the data. They've tracked the deer that are using it. And for example, 10,000 deer use the overpass, but only a quarter of that will use the underpass. And it talks about how wildlife vehicle collisions in that area have been virtually eliminated. And you can switch it over to the other side. And it has a picture of the overpass under construction and the deer actually using it. So these are just some informational things for us to all look at. Again, if we're going to make a recommendation to council, I would hope that we get the more current data that relates specifically to our preserve. But if not, at least you have something to look at, and appreciate you all putting that up.
Thank you, Commissioner Carla.
Did he get them?
Thank you, Commissioner Carla. I think this defense of the project, or argument for the project, or argument for the message to council is probably something that we'll take up when we have our work study session at some point, and we will decide as a group what the recommendation will be. And obviously, if individuals have a different position, then it will be something other than a unanimous recommendation. So it's, and this will all be relevant at that point in time, I'm sure. Commissioner Stevens?
Just something, I don't know if we should talk about this or not, but I was struggling with, do I have an obligation to review the projects and decide whether they're good projects, or I should recommend them be canceled? And I think I had an informal discussion with another commissioner on that. And I thought the conclusion we were going towards was, no, it's not really ours to question whether a project should keep going. We should just challenge cost appropriateness. And that's why on my other example on the water reclamation one, it's like, I just think they should know it's going up by 50 million and just should decide that that's a good use of the money. So if we go down the path where we're going to start challenging all the projects, I mean, we're barely going to do a decent job this year with what we've got. And if we think that's something we should do, maybe we do that in the future, but maybe we should take that off the table.
If we do it that way, we'll be here a long time. Commissioner Seitz.
Thank you. I like that Commissioner Carla called this a placeholder, and it makes me wonder. I see that it's forecasted for the first expenditures in the 27-28 budget. I don't see any harm in having a placeholder in a future year. There's no current expenditures. Everyone can plan for the tax to cover that as it gets closer and design is developed. I just don't see a downside for something to put that out there as a placeholder for everyone who's working with numbers in the future, given that 27-28 is a realistic start. I just don't see the harm of having a placeholder in there to be able to plan around it for this tax money.
Commissioner Newman.
Just want to, I think it is relevant for us to, for certain projects, not every project, but certain projects, the trade-off in terms of budget, especially in this one where we talk about debt versus spend, and there may be other options that the city could offer in that. And, you know, I think it is relevant because I've seen city council presentations where one of the comment is made, comes unanimous from the transportation committee or unanimous from this committee or whatever. So committees do that. And I think as it relates to budget, to Commissioner Stevens' comments, it is relevant if there's a budget question there to make a recommendation. So I would say that's consistent with other committees. And they are not elected officials, they are appointed, just like us.
Commissioner Carla, would you like the final word?
Yes, I'm only adding one sentence, which is, I agree, it's appropriate for us to make a recommendation, especially if recommending about transportation can save us money, because that's a lot of what this group is supposed to be looking at.
Let's move on to item 4, and Nick will come back to the stand and tell us about Parks and Recreation capital projects.
Chair, Vice Chair, members of the Commission, I'm pleased to shift to the transition to the Parks and Recreation projects. The projects that we will discuss will be projects that are funded through the 2019 bond program, through the general fund, and then through the Prop 490 Parks and Recreation 0.15% sales tax. Next slide. And this doesn't give a great representation right now as we look at the 0.15% Parks and Preserve tax. It speaks to what is proposed in the 25-26 budget and then what we have in the 5-year plan. I will say that as we discuss these projects and as we get to the end with questions, I can talk about how Parks and Recreation projects are prioritized. We can talk about how those projects in Parks and Recreation impact our operating budgets, and then also how the Prop 490 0.15% Parks and Preserve tax will impact any of our other general fund, or primarily our general fund budgets. Next slide. So this project right here, the Agua Linda Park improvements, is a capital project in the 5-year plan. It is in the 26-27 budget. This project will result in improvements to Agua Linda Park on McDonald and Pima, which is Scottsdale's oldest park. It was opened in 1967. The improvements include replacement of the playgrounds, the basketball and volleyball courts, the addition of shade, a splash pad, and new restrooms. Next slide. This slide just speaks to the overall, this can be a little bit, I'd have to let Scott jump in, but this is combining different funds between the bond 2019, the general fund, and any special restricted funds that we have. Next slide. So the next few slides that we'll cover will be projects that were funded through the 2019 bond program. This project to build a new swimming pool and replace the existing facilities at Cactus Pool is, the budget is $31.2 million. That's what the voters approved in the 2019 bond. We are recommending, we have that money in the proposed 25-26 budget. At this point, we have not requested any additional budget or any increase in budget for this particular project, as we are looking for design and programming before we understand what or if the cost will be what we projected in prior to 2019. Next slide. We have a couple of projects on here that they've met the criteria that we originally had for projects that were over 25 million. These projects are primarily completed. So this is to replace the aging infrastructure at Civic Center Plaza. So the Civic Center reconstruction project, that project was approved at 27.3 million. There was general fund money that was applied to that project in fiscal year 22-23. The project is complete and has been complete with the exception of some punch list items that we are still working through with the contractor. Next slide, please. The Aquatics Life Cycle Replacement Project is a general fund project. It is the continuation of a general fund project that we've had for the last several years that replaces equipment at the 4 aquatics facilities in the city of Scottsdale. This is one example of a project that we are carrying forward in the general fund. This is the only new request that Parks and Recreation has in the general fund in the out years. Next slide, please. The project to build multi-use fields in the area of Bell Road resulted in the construction of the Bell 94 Sports Complex, the Riata Sports Complex, and then the DC Ranch Neighborhood Park. This project has primarily been completed in that $0.8 million that's proposed in the 25-26 budget is primarily for punch list items as well. Next slide. Repair lakes and irrigation in the Indian Bend Wash. This is a project that started shortly after the 2019 bond election and that we're working through right now. It is in progress. This project was originally budgeted at $23.5 million in the 2019 bond program. There was an additional $10 million allocated to this project in fiscal year 22-23. There have not been significant scope increases in this project. Most of it has been cost increases and escalation. The only scope increase that did happen in this project was replacing lateral irrigation lines that were not originally planned to be replaced as part of the irrigation replacement project. So initially in 2017, 2018, prior to the bond, we had thought that we could use existing lateral lines in the replacement of the irrigation system, and that just wasn't a logical methodology when we got to construction. Next slide. Happy to answer any questions about those projects.
I'll start with a question, Nick, which is the only project you had in the packet that related to funding from the most recently passed .15 Parks and Preservation Fund was the one project, I forget what it was for, but...
it was improvements at Agua Linda Neighborhood Park.
Yes, page 3. Are there others? Are we aggressively spending against this? I mean, I think citizens may wonder. They passed it in November, so where's my new restroom?
Chair Smith, it's a phenomenal question. So we have a different project, which is similar improvements at Pima Park in year 1, so in the proposed 25-26 budget. And those projects will be very similar in terms of replacing recreation amenities, bathrooms at one of our older neighborhood parks in South Scottsdale. We have significant projects in the 5-year plan. So the method for the Prop 490 tax, which is a pay-as-you-go system, requires that we have a carry forward into future years for those significant improvements. So to answer your question specifically, we have one park renovation that we are planning to complete in fiscal year 25-26. We have 2 smaller neighborhood park renovations that we plan to complete in fiscal year 26-27, the following fiscal year. And in year 1, we will be doing a high volume of master planning for those projects, including design for future improvements as outlined in the master plan for Vista del Camino in El Dorado. So without the numbers in front of me, I believe we have somewhere in the neighborhood of $22 million scheduled for improvements in the Indian Bend Wash, which the tax specified that was a priority in years 3 and in years 5 of the 5-year plan.
As a general comment, I would say the council may find it informative, the public may find it informative to know how this new tax money is being spent to their benefit. And the council may also find it informative to know, to the extent projects are now funded from this 0.15 tax, what has this freed up, if you will, in the available funds that would otherwise have had a priority ranking in the overall capital program of the city. We now fund them with this tax as opposed to what we might have done before.
That's a great point, and we have budget in the operating portion of that sales tax for enhanced communication about the projects that are being completed through that Prop 490 initiative. And to answer the question about that relief on the general fund, we have several projects that are like the water projects, like the transportation projects. They're continuation, they're smaller continuations of larger, that make up a larger project. One would be our playground replacement program, and the other would be, we have essentially a park amenities replacement program that replaces things like courts, bigger capital items that are park amenities. Those items have been moved for new projects into the Prop 490 tax, to the Parks and Preserve, the 0.15% tax. The reason that the aquatics improvements, that we didn't include that in the future tax, is a lot of those projects are critical for facilities that are in the northern part of the city. So the McDowell Mountain Ranch Aquatic Center, the Cactus Aquatic Center, those areas that were not identified as the priority through the parks tax. So we have freed up in our future projects several areas that had been in the general fund, had been general fund requests, which all of our projects in parks had been general fund or bond funded. But that's a great point.
Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, just slide 5 on the cactus pool. Looks like that thing's going to start and finish this fiscal year, and it's a pretty big number, so I'm trying to understand sensitivity to changes. Are you far enough along in the design engineering that you know whether you're going to do like a low bid contract or a job order contracting, or if you can use one of the other two methods you use? Or are you not that far along on the design yet?
Commissioner Stevens, we are not that far along in design. We have $0 incurred to date on this project, and it's worth noting that, Carol, do you have one of the Cactus Aquatic Center replacement is one that's very complex. We are essentially replacing a building that is inside a major retention basin, and with that, there's some additional study that we want to do to, it would be the next slide. Next slide, Carol. Thank you. So this is the site that the Cactus Aquatics facilities is located at. This is after a rain event in 2023. So that doesn't necessarily answer your question, but we have several things to consider as we look at the replacement of this aquatic center, and we have not gotten to the point where we can make those recommendations. Commissioner Stevens, we will be looking at those in the upcoming fiscal year.
Okay, well, I saw the June, expecting completion June 26th. Maybe it's going to be later than that. Let me just say, gut feel, this smells like one that we could be hearing again in the future and have big increases and surprises and stuff. So I just encourage you to do whatever you think you need to do in putting together your estimates or pre-bid studies or whatever it is, the things that you do, because it smells like one that could get ugly.
And Commissioner Stevens, part of the reason why this is part of the 2019 bond program, and part of the reasons, one of the reasons we haven't come forward with any additional request is we really want to know where we're at in terms of what that request would be. I've heard several other of my colleagues talk about this, but we want to know a level of programming. We want to understand exactly what we need to build. This concept was introduced for the bond program in 2017. So before that really is our priority in the upcoming 25-26 year is to go through that exercise that you're recommending.
Vice Chair Swiker.
Yeah, I agree with those points that Commissioner Stevens just made, so you get a better grasp of what a project is going to look like in realistic time. But if anyone questions the need for any of these, when I was on the 490 task force, Nick took us a tour of these parks and everything that are in here. If anyone questions the needs of this, I would ask Nick to arrange a tour, especially in the southern part of the city. I mean, I was absolutely appalled at the condition of some of these. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with transportation, because what we're discovering, I think, is this is a really good example of costs increasing due to unfilled deferred or unfunded deferred maintenance, that some of these have gotten down so bad that it's replacement, not fixing them up. So much like the road repairs, you know, if we don't properly take care of our parks, eventually the cost is way more than it needs to be.
Commissioner Carla?
Yes. First thing, I also want to concur with what Commissioner Stevens said, so colorfully said. And maybe that is going to be one of our future recommendations, that we ask for better projections, so then it doesn't look like we have so many surprises. And I know it's not intentional, but maybe that is a recommendation, because that's what seems to lead to a lot of the mistrust. And then to go back to what Chairman Smith said and Nick followed up on, those of us who promoted 490 have talked with various staff, especially about the two commissions, Parks and Preserve, that are overseeing the funds, that starting maybe next year or the year after, when we've built up money and you've done a lot of projects, that every year you start putting out something like the Water Department does. Where it's a pretty slick thing, but it goes out and it's not minutia budget, but it's top line, and it says this is where your money's gone this year. And I really think when it comes to 490 that we do need to do that. So, thank you.
I think that's it, Nick.
Thank you.
And now we are at item number 5, which is everything else. We're going to have a variety of city staff presenting various departmental budgets, and we'll start with the police capital projects. And Joe, I think you're going to whiz us through them.
I plan to. Chairman Smith, Vice Chair Schweikert, and members of the commission, my name is Joe LeDuc. I am the interim chief of police, and I'm here to talk to you about a couple more timely projects. I'll advance my slides here. Our proposed fiscal year 25-26 capital budget is $40.5 million. I want to talk about two, like I said, timely projects. The first one is the radio communications platform transition. This is a critical project. Total cost is $3.2 million, and our proposed budget for fiscal year 25-26 is the $3.2 million. And what this is it's really two things. It involves hardware and software that has reached the end of its life. So as far as the hardware is concerned, it was installed over 20 years ago. There's no replacement parts for it. It's the actual communication platforms that our 911 operators use. And then on top of that, there is a new software system that is going to sunset in October of 2025 with Windows 10 that we're going to need to upgrade to an entirely new system. So we need, which also speaks with the new hardware. If we don't do this project, then we won't be able to operate the 911 center and communications, so it's vitally important. We're looking at starting this project in July and trying to get it done within a year, hopefully under a year, at least in phases. The next timely project I want to talk about is us replacing the deteriorating training track. This was an original bond project back in 2019 and 2018. We estimated $2.9 million. However, there was a lot of conversation at that time as we talked about expanding our training footprint with the fire department, and we determined that building the track over at the Hans facility where we originally wanted to do it, there just wasn't enough space to not only build a robust track that we need, but one that the state would certify for us to have reach a standard of training that we need, training our officers in like emergency type driving and whatnot. We were actually fortunate to find a plot of land and acquired it just south of the water campus up in North Scottsdale but that requires some significant grading and construction and whatnot. So as you saw on the previous slide, we were looking for an additional $7 million to make the project $9.9 million to do this track right. The track would be used not only by the police department, but also defensive driving courses for other city employees who drive vehicles and whatnot. So those are the two ones that I was presenting. I can answer any questions now.
Thank you. One question I'll ask, and maybe you can just talk about it off the top of your head, but one of the largest projects that you have in the total $40.5 million budget is the almost $20 million to renovate the jail and the, I guess, the court buildings down there. Can you talk about that project? And
Yeah. So specifically, you're talking about the Civic Center area that includes the jail. Yeah, that's a significant project. The need for that is we just ran out of space. It was built, that jail was built in 1971. It has plumbing issues. The air handlers go out to the entire building, so there's a sanitary issue there. The doors, another example on that jail, the doors are obsolete and now need actual custom fittings every time one of the jail doors break down. Additionally, surrounding that area, we have several different work units that have grown significantly, and so we're just kind of walking all over each other. We joke around, call it a Franken building, because we've just tried to piecemeal it together for so long to keep it as an effective space for our employees, and we're just at the point now where we're just on top of each other. There's not adequate space. The infrastructure is failing and whatnot, so that's a project that's on the horizon, but it's fitting in with a court remodel, a phase 2 jail dormitory project that we want to do, and so we're probably looking at that being spread over several fiscal years before we are able to actually break ground and start to see what that looks like.
not bad off the top of your head.
Thank you.
And I think everybody would agree that we want the doors to work on the jail.
Oh, yeah.
So it's,
Oh, yeah.
Commissioner Newman.
Yes, on the vehicle training track, are there other tracks in the area that are utilized?
That's a great question. There are a couple tracks in the area that we do use, and even right now, because we are without a track, there are some definite challenges to using those tracks. For example, we primarily use Mesa Police Department's track. Number one, it's scheduling. They schedule the track, obviously, and they prioritize their own needs for the track, so trying to get into the schedule to train our officers is sometimes a challenge. Additionally, we have to take our track cars all the way out to Mesa. That incurs extra costs in overtime. The timeliness of trying to get out there and set up specific times that aren't conducive to our schedules sometimes incurs extra expense like overtime and things like that. So it really just becomes a logistical issue and a scheduling issue for us to be able to get out there and then adequately train all of our officers in the time that we need them trained.
Okay, there's no right answer to this next question, but kind of when you say you're talking about scheduling conflicts, what is the utilization on a weekly basis or monthly basis that you see, that you would see for this?
Yeah, we run pretty regularly. I don't have an exact number of how often we do monthly, especially now that we've had our training center under construction for a while, so we've been really borrowing from other places to do driving training and things like that. But I would say in our peak that we're doing either a defensive driving course or some type of what we call EVOC course once a month. Once every couple months, doing the emergency driving, because we actually have modular training and we have to train all of our sworn employees on that, upwards of 400 to shift them through. So I think once a month is a good number that we're using it for the emergency driving, and maybe a little less frequently for the defensive driving, the backing and whatnot, which is also utilized by other city employees.
Well, just a thought that I had going through this, and I'll have the same for the fire chief as well, in terms of the training facilities. If our utilization is such, is that a monetization opportunity for other police departments and sharing of skills and best practices? But using facilities right now, you're using Mesa. I suppose we pay Mesa for that, but the reverse can be true, and you can have world-class facilities and be a training center of excellence around that, and that's monetization, but also sharing of best practices.
Yeah, excellent. And, you know, we actually were already approached by Salt River Police Department, who was very interested in maybe doing some cost sharing with our track down the road. Nothing formal, but, you know, just ancillary conversations about that. So that's a very good point.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any further questions?
I assume you will not have a roundabout on the training track.
We may. We'll have to figure out how to get around them.
Commissioner Stevens, you have a more serious question?
Yeah, I do. I'm curious about whether you're thinking of having one of your people who really knows exactly what you want from the structure of the jail so it'll operate correctly. If you're thinking of assigning someone who really knows what you need to be married to the project manager and design engineer so that they're working together as a group to make sure once that design is done and the thing starts getting bid and executed that you're going to get what you want, because if otherwise when you don't get them married early enough or close enough as they're doing it, you're going to start going, oh, wait, I needed this here, I needed that there, and that's when the cost overruns start to hit.
100%, Commissioner Stevens. A lot of thought and a lot of detail is an effort is brought to bear. That's why the design phase of this is so important in the planning phase, but it is a robust effort. Does that answer your question? I appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's it, Joe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Tom Shannon is getting prepared to approach the dais to talk about the needs of the fire department, the next budget area.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Commission. The fire department is pleased to present our projects. Next slide. Okay, so what you're looking at here is the projects underway in 24-25. And there are numerous projects in the coming years to both improve our current facilities, bringing them up to current standards within the NFPA recommendations, as well as some new projects related to our beginning of our ambulance services. Next slide. Of note to the Commission is a project that is actually not a bond project, it's a capital project that was budgeted for some time. If I can use the Elmo very briefly, this will help kind of illustrate this project a little bit better. So this is Station 606 at 108th and Via Linda. It's quite an old station. It was built in 1984 and actually housed some of the fire prevention staff back before the fire department was a municipal department. It is simply just an outdated facility and needed to be completely remodeled. When we worked with capital projects to get into the meat of this project, what we determined was not only were there site issues with sewage draining and a multitude of drainage issues, but the building itself, as you can see, is a tri-level, and that just simply wasn't contemporary in terms of its design, in terms of access to the apparatus bays for quick response times, or simply the square footage needed for individual living quarters, which is now the contemporary status of the fire service. These existing cubicles, if you will, or cubby holes where firefighters would reside are no longer contemporary. The current plan is to essentially rebuild the fire station, and once that was determined, we realized we could not coexist at that same site. That was probably the most significant change in this project, between the site issues and then the fact that we couldn't coexist there caused us to have to relocate. We're going to relocate just down the street to the NOAA clinic, you may recall, is just down the street near the Miracle League ball field. And that is going to be actually invested in for not only this station's rebuild, but also the Station 4 rebuild, which is at the Via Linda campus. And so the significant cost increase that you saw in this is the rendering of the NOAA clinic, and we can go back to the PowerPoint. Thank you. The significant cost increase that you saw between the original cost of the project and then the current proposed project cost is really related to the need to relocate, and then quite frankly, it's a rebuild, not necessarily a remodel. And so Commissioner Stevens, in your subcommittee, you made a good point, and you just did just a minute ago, about the connectedness of staff with CPM staff. And I have every confidence that we are right where you need us to be in terms of working these projects together. I think this is a good example of that. Under Alice's leadership, I think we're going to be much tighter on the programming needs of projects so that they can get a very accurate estimate, and then we get little tweaks that might be related to cost increase. So I think we're going to meet your interest. Next slide. Okay, we're not probably going to be able to give you champagne, Commissioner Smith, but we're going to give you probably a mimosa this morning or this afternoon. This project started out as an $18 million project. Very much like the police department, we train our staff regionally. They have to meet a regional standard. And we were outsourcing our staff and have been for our entire existence to other agencies. And quite simply, the system that we exist in is just maturing, and there's growth related, and we simply don't have the available space. So this project was conceived several years ago, and in its conception, it was designed with a much smaller footprint in mind. And so we initially had some scope issues when it initially got programmed, and we got together, as you recommend, Commissioner Stevens. The CPM staff realized we needed a much bigger campus. So from a 10 to 11,000 square foot footprint for a building, moving to more of a 30,000 square foot footprint is what demonstrated the scope increase on this project. And then, of course, we were subject to the impacts of COVID and the cost of commodities there. And so this project had an increase of about $11 million overall, bringing it to about $33 million. The great news here is that the carryover, which is represented in the 5.8, really only is going to require about $2 million of that 5.8. And to answer your question, Commissioner Stevens, that you offered us, that is a result of essentially bills having not been paid just yet, and carryover for remaining items that would not have prevented us to move into the building. There's one small additional feature to the facility that's being added that has to do with, quite frankly, hot zone. If you think of a training center as having a dirty hot zone area, a warm zone where perhaps you begin to decontaminate, and then a clean zone where the classrooms might be. We need to provide some additional shower facilities and a gathering point in that area, but I don't expect that to be more than about $300,000 of the remaining 2-point-something million. So you should see about a $3 million recovery in this project, and Allison is nodding her head. So there's your mimosa. Okay. Next slide. I guess we get to questions.
Well, I got my mimosa, so I'm all set. Any questions from the rest of the people?
Okay. Seeing no questions.
They're either timid or tired, one or the other, but I have no further questions for you,
Okay,
Tom. Thank you for the presentation. Ms. Doyle is now approaching the microphone to talk about enterprise operations.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the Commission. I'm Judy Doyle, the Senior Director of the Enterprise Operations. Next slide, please. The Enterprise Operations Department is a new department, and it combines those business-oriented divisions: Westworld, Tourism and Events, Scottsdale Stadium, McCormick-Stillman Railroad Park, and the airport. Next slide, please. Here is a summary of the existing and new projects with various funding sources within the department, comparing what was in the adopted fiscal year 24-25 budget to what was proposed for fiscal year 25-26. Next slide, please. So this afternoon, I'm going to highlight two projects from the department, the first one being a Westworld project. Westworld, as we know, is a one-of-a-kind, unique venue. It spans over 386 acres, has 300 square feet of exhibit space, 10 arenas, and over 11,000 parking spaces. It hosts over 90 events annually, with about 800 guests. Unfortunately, though, Westworld does have some drainage issues. Next slide, please. So there are three Westworld projects that are proposed for fiscal year 25-26. The largest is shown here, totaling $14.9 million, and it is spread over 4 years. It will address several existing drainage issues throughout the core of Westworld's equestrian areas, including the barns, arenas, the southern restroom building, the RV areas, and parking areas. Next slide, please. So here is a map that highlights that focused area, and then just some of the drainage issues that we see in those photos after a rain event. All three of the drainage projects are essential to mitigating those flooding issues that we experience that do damage the infrastructure and do contribute to increases in the long-term maintenance, as well as it disrupts those revenue-generating events that we know contribute significantly to our city's economy. The proposed drainage projects would be phased in to eliminate or minimize the disruptions during that heavy event season. The drainage will be mostly performed over the summer months. This particular drainage project, just because of the large scope, it will be spanned over 4 summers. We do plan to issue debt for the 3 Westworld drainage projects, which had always been the plan related to the Proposition 490, issuing the debt for Westworld and then paying the debt service with that 0.15 preserve tax, not to exceed $4.5 million per year. Prop 490 did include limited Westworld capital improvements for drainage and shade. So we plan to issue WIFA debt. This would be a first for the city. The Water Infrastructure Finance Authority of Arizona, which manages debt for water-related projects. They offer low-interest loans to municipalities and utilities. The amounts for these drainage projects are pretty solid estimates, at least for the total project, as a lot of work was done as staff prepared for the Preserve Task Force. The amounts will be refined as we move through the design process. Needless to say, we're excited about getting these much-needed drainage improvement projects at Westworld. Next slide, please. Moving on to tourism and events, we have a proposed project that has been in the capital budget since 2017 for downtown Main Street streetscape and pedestrian improvements. The project is to design and construct bicycle lanes, sidewalks, roadside landscaping, and replace street and pedestrian lighting with the goal of promoting Main Street as a major east-west pedestrian corridor. The reason for the significant delay in this project is we had done some preliminary designs that the stakeholders in the area were not very fond of because it was going to reduce parking. To get the traffic lanes, the parking, and the sidewalk widths to city standards, parking would need to be reduced. However, now, with a couple of the new parking structures coming online in the Old Town area, this should reduce those parking concerns. We know that the project is going to be a great investment to Old Town, and we really want to get moving on this project with a design that will work for all of the stakeholders. Based on the latest concept of the consultant, what the consultant had put together, we did get some initial buy-in from those stakeholders. So we added the needed $5.8 million to year 2 of the 5-year plan to get this project completed. So next steps would be, with that latest concept, we would lay out a public input process and timeline through design and construction. And that concludes my 2 projects. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Let me have you clarify for the public this WIFA debt, W-I-F-A. I think you said it's for water projects related. And you also said it's a low attractive interest rate. Can you or the city treasurer talk about why this is attractive, what we really expect to save on interest rate-wise?
Thank you, Chair Smith, Commissioners. The WIFA program has not been available for cities our size until more recently, but the attractiveness of it is there could be a principal forgiveness portion up to 20%, especially for this flood control project. So if we qualify for some or all of that 20% principal forgiveness, it could provide us significant savings.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The Commissioner Stevens, you had your light on, but you've declined now.
I'll just do it real fast. You've got $14.9 million that's going to happen in about 4 years or so. Are those today's dollars, or did you factor in some of the cost increases? Because we've heard horror stories about particularly earth-moving construction type things.
Chair, Vice Chair, and Commissioner, the project total, $14.9 million, for ease was spread evenly over the 4 years. As we get through design, we feel comfortable about the $14.9 million number overall for the total project. Once we get through design, years 2, 3, and 4 would likely be spread differently to consider some of those increases.
Okay, so then the only question, I guess, to everyone when you're doing these things, should you be factoring some of that in now if there's a reason to believe cost increases might occur, and just don't do everything in today's dollars? That's all.
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you. Understood. Actually, I had the same question as I was reviewing these projects for my new area. Thank you.
I think we have exhausted the panel here, so have Kira come up and
Thank you.
talk to us about community facilities, if you will.
Good afternoon, Chair Smith, Vice Chair Schweiker, and members of the Commission. My name is Kira Peters, and I am the Senior Director over Library and Human Services. I have 3 brief slides that are all relative to the Human Service Division under my area. And next slide, please. This is just a little snapshot of what we have currently happening for fiscal year 24, 25, and then the future 5 years for these 3 projects that I'm going to talk about today, some of which are beyond 25, 26. Next slide. This right here is a representation of the expansion of Via Linda Senior Center. For those of you who don't know, we have 2 very robust senior centers in the city of Scottsdale, Granite Reef Senior Center and Via Linda Senior Center. On average, per month, we see about 3,500 to 4,000 people between those 2 senior centers, depending on the season. So these centers are busy. We've got leisure education classes that happen that often have wait lists in them. So there's definitely a need to expand the Via Linda Senior Center. Right now, this project is estimated at $6.3 million. We're right now in design phase for that, have an architect on board, and right now the initial preliminary designs are coming in a little underneath 6.3, so we're really feeling good about staying on budget with the expansion of Via Linda Senior Center, and you can see the timeline pictured up there. So very excited about this project that is going to be upon us shortly. Next slide, please. So the next one, again, keeping in the theme of senior centers, is to expand the Granite Reef Senior Center to meet the demand for adult daycare. As our community ages, we really are finding that our senior centers are amazing at offering recreational opportunities for the community, but the need for support and care for the senior population, along with some maybe moderate medical support, is in need. So what we would like to do in future fiscal years is to expand the Granite Reef Senior Center to also include an adult daycare. And right now, estimated budget is $3 million. Honestly, I do anticipate we haven't designed that. We're just in the midst of starting to talk about that right now. I do expect, just with like everything else we've been talking about here today, inflation, that number could increase. So we'll work with the CPM staff on that. And again, this would be right adjacent to the current Granite Reef Senior Center to provide an adult daycare center. And again, timeline is noted on the slide. Next slide, please. This is a future project for sure, but I just couldn't help myself and wanted to include it in here as we talk about aging infrastructure, is the replacement of the Paiute Neighborhood Community Center. Paiute Neighborhood Center is going to be turning 30 this year. Even prior to the city using Paiute, it was an elementary school. The infrastructure there is very old. Maintaining this building is costly. For the city, oftentimes having HVAC issues and plumbing issues. So really having a replacement of these aging buildings in the future is going to be important. Right now, we're estimating this budget to be $11.2 million, but as my colleagues have talked about today, what we're doing early on, we've got several years, and I know Commissioner Stevens, you posed a question, are we really evaluating cost increase? I think this is one of the slides you had a question on, so I wanted to address that. And yes, we are. Right now, we are really looking at the programming needs of this community. The area around Paiute has really changed a lot, so we're evaluating what the community needs to really put together a plan on what this center will look like, and then compare that against that $11.2 million. Next slide. I promised to be brief, and that was brief. Happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Newman has a question or comment.
Just a question. A couple of times in the presentation you mentioned, okay, 3 million and then 11.2, and you said, well, we'll see what it is and then we'll see what the price is from there. I'm kind of used to being given a certain amount of money and then making it fit that.
Yeah.
What's your process of thinking about that?
Yes, no, thank you, Chair Smith and Commissioner Newman. I will correct myself in that, yes, we do that. When we have this budget, and we'll meet with the CPM staff to say, all right, how can we stay within this budget unless there are things that are just extraordinarily not feasible within that budget. So that is certainly what we'll do. And Via Linda was my first example, and that really is exactly what we did. What do we need? What's our budget? How can we stay within that?
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
On slide, on page 26, I guess it was, when you're expanding the Granite Reef Senior Center to meet the demands for adult daycare, can you explain what that phrase adult daycare means?
Yes. Chair Smith, it is a really good question. And adult daycare can mean a lot of different things. Right now, Granite Reef Senior Center really hosts a lot of recreation activities, special events for seniors. What we're seeing is really a need for aging adults that might have some medical issues, whether it is early stages of dementia or they might need some level of medical care, which right now Granite Reef Senior Centers, as it stands and as we program it, we're not equipped for that. We don't have nurses on site. What this adult daycare could be is really a place where seniors that need a little bit of support, social interaction, along with some moderate medical care, could come to an adult daycare for a fee and be provided a great place to socialize and be throughout the day and be safe while caretakers can go to work and manage their lives as well. It truly has been an area that we're seeing a lot of need for that, for adult children taking care of aging parents that are still working, needing a place to be that really has a next level of support compared to what would traditionally happen in just recreation programming at a senior center.
And did I understand you in the middle of that answer to be saying that this is a fee-based service?
Yes, Chair Smith, you are correct.
Does it, and I know I'm asking more than I need to know about this, but is this factor in FTEs? I mean, additional people that would be associated with the facility? And maybe that's true for any capital project we've looked at here today, but
Chairman Smith, to the best of my knowledge, this is strictly for the construction of the project and does not take into account FTEs. What would probably happen with an adult daycare, just knowing the medical needs, is that this would be contracted out to a third party who has expertise in adult daycare needs, and we would work that way to provide this service to the community.
Commissioner Carlin.
Yes, I think this is very much needed, but I have a question about your saying fee-based, because I know many of the programs up there, they don't cover the entire expense because you're trying to make the fee still feasible for seniors who have only Social Security. So are you thinking along the same avenue for this fee? Because, most of the people who live in that part of town probably can't afford the full fee. So I was just curious if you're going to be operating on the same ratio.
Thank you for the question. Chairman Smith, Commissioner Carla, we are really evaluating that right now. We're benchmarking, we're doing research how other adult daycares operate. Honor Health actually has one. With my colleague Judy, we were able to take a tour. So we really need to get into that piece of it and the fees and what that will look like. Quite honestly, we're trying to determine ourselves the scope of adult daycare and what we really want to see happen at this facility and see how our already existing senior center in Granite Reef could support what's happening there. But for sure, we will be taking a look at that and really vetting that out carefully for the exact reasons that you mentioned.
Commissioner Newman.
So on this topic, I want to ask this very sensitively because I don't want to appear cold business or anything like that, but is this the role of Scottsdale government? And I don't want to crush the program or anything like that, but you're starting to get into senior care, right? And I don't know if this is something that's been prioritized by council, or it's an idea we've had, or it's something we've been doing. I don't know, so I just don't have the background, but it would be helpful to understand kind of what, from a policy perspective, led to this role of Scottsdale government.
Sure, thank you for the question. Chairman Smith and Commissioner Newman, it's a great question. And what we've been trying to do, and I've mentioned we're in evaluation stage of what this could be, and I really mean that. We're still really exploring what would adult daycare be. Some of them really do have a lot of medical care and they're doing that. Others really just have expanded recreation, which is definitely in the scope of what senior services in the city could do. So it's a little preliminary for me to give you exact answers to that, as we're still trying to evaluate and figure out what this facility would be. But I do hear you, and I'll take note of that too as we do our evaluation. Thank you.
Well, before you come forward for $3 million, which I guess it sounds like it starts fairly soon, shouldn't that question be answered before you put that in the budget and start down that path? I don't know if the research has to come to lead to that, but there's certainly a policy priority discussion that the council can have around that to say, hey, should we really be doing that?
Right.
I'll help. Yeah, Mr. Chair and Commissioner, I think that's exactly what we're doing. Yes. So
this leads to that
yes, sir,
decision.
Exactly. So you're getting the preview, and I think what I would see is we're here to serve the community, and just take the senior population. We serve active seniors, and we see that there's a gap in service for this portion of our community, and then we're going to have a conversation with City Council to see if they want capital and programming to fill that gap if we want to play that role.
I don't. Because there's just so many priorities we've talked about here, so I don't know where that fits in that. I understand what you're saying. I don't know where the role of government ends in that, and what would be the magnitude of the follow-on capital project, because this is the preliminary. Is the next one 10 times that?
Sure, all good questions, Mr. Chair and Commissioner. I would also add, from my limited understanding in this area, we're not the first to explore it. So there are, I'm getting notified by my colleague over here that this is a bond project too, so I would insert, that's, yeah, she said that, so you can question her if you have questions. So I am familiar, I think Phoenix, for example, I could be mistaken, but I do know of another municipality in the metropolitan area that provides this. And so therefore, what I understand is that our community members that are aware of that have to travel significant distances to get to that facility, and so we have a need, and it's an unmet need, and so want to have an honest conversation with our city council and you before that, as we're having here, if we should fill that. And then maybe the bond project, my colleague could add to that piece.
Yeah, so the expansion of the senior center is a bond 2019 project that voters voted on and approved. Perhaps the discussion is regarding the operation of it and the program.
Right.
Of,
Yeah, I mean, I just see the slippery slope. I mean, the facilities, if it's bond approved by voters, I mean, that it is what it is. But I'm sitting here, if there's other municipalities that have done this, does it cost us $3 million to go find out what their learnings are from that and have council make a policy decision on that? It seems like we could do that for far less than $3 million.
So just to expand on that, so what we have is an expansion, and then again, when you look at the spectrum of the population, we are serving the need in an active area, and some could argue maybe that could be, you could higher the level of service, increase the level of service in the actives, but we are significantly not meeting a need in this portion of the spectrum of our population. And as noted, unfortunately, we're all getting older. And so we see this really as the start of a need that someone has to fill. And should we play a role? That's an appropriate question that we'll be approaching our city council with.
Thank you.
So I think you're hearing from several of us up here that as, in a sense, a new business initiative, this is a program that should be carefully vetted with council and really having nothing to do with expanding the senior center as may have been proposed by the bond 2019.
Understood. Thank you.
And that involves then issues of policy, as Commissioner Newman said, it involves the FTE requirements, and be careful that we don't get on a slippery slope here. Commissioner Carlin?
Yes, I understand all that, but as a person who's at that senior center all the time for classes, and I see what goes on a lot, that there's caregivers who need to put someone somewhere for 3 hours, and they can't afford to have that done in the home. I know it has to be explored carefully, but I do hope it is explored and we find a way to go forward, at least to provide relief for those clients, because they've used the senior center since it was built, and now they can't exactly be alone up there, but they need somewhere to go. So I do hope it works out. Thank you.
And I think that's all the questions or comments we have for you.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Bianca? Tell us everything we need to know about information services.
Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chair, members of the Commission. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to brief you on the proposed capital technology projects that include in our budget proposal. Our proposal reflects investments in key infrastructure that supports community-facing and services in city operations. As we have adjusted our 5-year outlook, we wanted to ensure long-term planning, but also that we can deliver on our current and emerging needs, specifically in the areas of infrastructure upgrades, connectivity, cybersecurity, and cloud readiness. The proposed, can I have the next slide, please? The proposed budget includes a continuation of existing projects as well as new initiatives to enhance service delivery. So I will be speaking to you about 3 of our projects this afternoon. Next slide, please. The first one is a Bond 2019 funded initiative, and this project expands our fiber optics backbone to connect every city-owned facility, including libraries, community centers, fire stations, as well as administrative offices, really building a unified and secure network that connects all departments. In addition, it provides dedicated fiber connectivity to all signalized intersections, traffic management systems, as well as other key infrastructure assets, including water facilities and public safety stations, ensuring real-time coordinations of efforts and operational efficiencies. It also helps us improve the reliability of our public network infrastructure. It helps us optimize our traffic operations and increased access to digital services. One of the goals for this project is to, again, build that secure, reliable communication network, but also to ensure that the city has greater control over its critical connectivity, and that eventually we will see some cost efficiencies because we're moving away from leased lines to city-owned fiber connections. And the majority of this project, as I mentioned, is funded by Bond 2019, but also we have contributions from transportation, water, and aviation funding, really demonstrating our citywide commitment and to have a unified approach to our modernizing our infrastructure. And this project is governed by a fiber governance committee that includes representatives from all those areas. And then to date, more than 60 miles of fibers have been laid, with 100 miles of fiber estimated to be completed once this project is done. Next slide, please. The next project I will be talking to you about is a critical one. So this funding is essential to support the needed upgrades to our data center server infrastructure, which powers the entire city, including core systems like financial systems, planning, access to information and data, and also public safety and emergency response systems. So we have a 5-year replacement cycle, which is a standard industry standard approach, and this funding really reflects a yearly phased out approach to replacing our more than 500 servers that are end of life as we plan for those replacements, and really replacing this aging equipment and out of support servers. We are increasing the reliability, security, and performance of our server infrastructure, while also ensuring that we support our disaster recovery and business continuity capabilities. Next project, please. So this is a new initiative. So we are requesting support for funding. So today, approximately 25% of our applications operate in the cloud, and that number continues to increase as we continue to modernize our systems. This project really establishes a foundational cloud-based architecture that we need to ensure that those applications are secure, that they're well managed, and that they're integrated with existing data that is on-prem or with newer systems that we will continue to acquire that are software, so cloud-based and off-premise solutions. It also helps us to leverage cloud-native analytics capabilities that really empowers our departments to gain faster and deeper insights from data, and with the goal to enhance our decision-making capabilities, enhance our service delivery capability, and also our responsiveness to community needs. And so this general funding request ensures not only that we can move to the cloud, but we can do this in a way that's strategic, that's secure, and that really aligns with our digital service goals. And then it also positions us to take full advantage of new innovations in AI, automations, real-time data access, while ensuring that we have strong cybersecurity and compliance standards for those applications. So that concludes my presentation. I welcome your questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Staying with that slide for a moment, I see that the completion is not until, whatever, 4 years from now. Yes. Is that purposeful, or do we just not have the money? This would seem like a fairly high...
Yeah, we were very conservative, yes. So again, the 25% applications, we were going to focus on securing the infrastructure to support access, to ensure that we can leverage those applications in a secure and strategic way. And as we continue to grow, so we were looking at being strategic about what systems and application we can move to the cloud to, again, leverage new capabilities, but we'll do that in a very phased out way and very strategic way with input from our business units. So yeah, I would say that the number is conservative.
Commissioner Newman?
Just a question around investment. I mean, you got there's some big numbers there, 11 million here and 17 million there. I can't remember the exact number, but on IT, on information architecture and technology, it ages, as you said, for a 5-year replacement cycle. Why wouldn't our strategy be to outsource as much as possible rather than build our own and maintain our own? AWS and others have massive systems, and there's others. Fiber optics, I buy that and have very good gigabit supply. So I don't know, what brings you from the service wanting to own it? Is it mission critical? What is it? I'd like to understand that.
We absolutely have investigated and assessed our how can we prioritize that move to the cloud? But the reality is that as a city, we will not be able to move the entire infrastructure to the cloud, right? We have systems that need to be secure to be on-prem, but also physical infrastructure that needs to be connected in a way that is, provides us a long-term connectivity, and we can control it as an organization. So I would say we're being very strategic about what we can move to the cloud, but we have to do this in a phased out as we prioritize cloud services.
Well, and so it's, I mean, is it importance of the mission? You can't absolutely, I can understand like police and fire, it absolutely can't go down. You have to own those systems, and you have to maintain that, and I agree with upgrading them from Windows 10. But, but it seems like installing fiber, that's leasable, and it's pretty much a staple type of utility, just like we buy electricity. We don't own the electric plant, we buy electricity. Why can't we buy fiber service? Why can't we buy server service? We don't have to own those things. So it just seems like a lot of capital going to things that, hey, and let them do all the upgrades, maintenance, uptime, all of that. And you can even pay more for higher uptime and backup servers and things like that.
Yeah, you can scale and yes. If we go back to the fiber slide, please. So that was a project that was initiated in 2020. Can you, two more back, yes. And one more, yeah. Number 31, page 31, yeah. 2020, so that was a decision that was made then, so it's funded by the bond. This is something that the city at that time decided that was a great strategy. So, and we are very close to completing that project. So we're going to leverage that connectivity capability while we're also building that cloud strategy. So as a city, we also undertook a assessment of all our applications to, again, assess their cloud readiness, right? What makes sense? What can we shift and lift? What makes sense to maintain on-prem? because of the cost efficiencies.
So we're kind of having to manage through past decisions in
Yes.
terms of bond and things like that. Okay. I guess going forward, I would hope that we would think more in terms of outsourcing these things, because you have to then, 5 years from now, you're going to be coming with a project to say, oh, the bond bought these things, and now we need to buy these things again because they're outdated.
Yes, and that's a great question. So for new applications and new systems, we are a cloud-first strategy. So we're looking at the cloud, what's in the marketplace, and definitely at all those cloud providers, cloud service providers I mentioned, software as a service. When we have an RFP for a particular system, that is one of the options that we ask the vendors to propose. So we are cloud-first, but we are as a city, we are going to be hybrid for some time.
Great, thank you. We've got smart IT people. We need smarter bond issues.
If I may, Mr. Chair, on that regard, I think we just adding to this conversation, and Bianca does it extremely well, but just wanted to add to the comment about kind of outsourcing versus our own infrastructure. And again, two very different projects, but I'll use this one. It's very common for a municipality to own their own infrastructure, fiber infrastructure that has a significantly longer shelf life. Some of the software and some of the applications, that could certainly go a different route. But let me use an analogy just as an example. In fleet services, it's not uncommon for small businesses in the private sector to do some type of lease option. It's much more common in municipalities to own vehicles, have fleet replacement, and be able to control those assets and how they roll in and out of your system. So just using those two analogies, again, from my experience, very common to have backbone infrastructure for fiber optics. And you have security issues with FD, PD, and then in addition, the smart cities applications for these, the bandwidth and controlling all that is enormous. And if I talked much further, I'd get way beyond my swim lane, and that's why we have such a wonderful expert like Bianca.
Mentioned, so smart city, the Internet of Things, so all those applications and hardware, right, thinking of all the cameras or the traffic lights, those are now, we're able to secure them and control them and really make sure that they have integrations with other systems that help us make better decisions and real-time decision as it comes to what's happening in our community.
Okay, that's very helpful. It makes sense, because I understand the Internet of Things and everything connected across Scottsdale. It's a massive undertaking. It just seems like some of these things, when you think about AWS and others, wherever we can utilize that and let them take care of it, it would be useful. But I understand the criticality of it.
Yes, and Commissioner, we make that assessment before we pursue the investments in the new applications. We look at what's the cloud availability and how we can make sure that it's integrated even with the existing on-prem infrastructure to make sure we get the most value from that investment.
Thank you.
Commissioner Seitz?
Thank you. I had similar thoughts about build or buy. And I want to confirm my understanding that that decision was made in prior years. That's why it's in an adopted budget.
Yeah, so this is an updated budget. We're not asking for additional funds from the next fiscal year. We wanted to present it to you because it is a bond project. It's obviously a community-facing budget, and we want to make sure that you have an understanding of what we're managing.
Well, the second part of my question was the charge back to the departments, because are they paying for the buy services? And so as we build our own, will the departments be paying then for the fiber optic services? You charge back a lot of the technology, do you not?
So once the infrastructure is in place, the cost is not significant. And the three departments, transportation, water, and aviation I mentioned, they're already contributing for their specific facilities. So from the bond, it's only 80% of that funding that's coming from the bond. The rest is from other funds.
I think we have no more questions for you.
Thank you so much.
And at this point, we go to agenda item number 5, which is to identify whether anyone up here or the staff wants to suggest an item for future topic to be voted on the future agenda. And we don't discuss the item, we'll just vote on whether we all collectively think that's a good idea to have on a future agenda. Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, what I did, I was going to do a proposed agenda item trying to formalize the review of unfilled FTE positions, because that's one area which we should have a role. And in doing some conferring, thought it would be better if we formally did a motion and directed staff to include that information in their presentation to us. So if it's appropriate, I'd like to hand out a motion, let you all have it in front of you, and then I make a motion about it, and if you all agree, we can talk about it. And what this is, it's just to give you a heads up, it's what we said before. It's to take all the positions at a year to date that have been unfilled all year, and all those positions that have been unfilled for half of the year, and then direct staff, both the treasurer's office and the city manager's office, to ask their people when they put their budgets together to present to us, that they include the degree to which these positions were considered in putting the budget together, okay? My dream on this would be that when the department reports are made back to us, a part of it might be, here's the positions that were unfilled all year and the positions that were unfilled for part of the year. We took a look at those things. We decided that these couple could be eliminated. They weren't necessary. We decided we could combine these two into another function. And then also we decided we might need, I've freed up staff and I'd sure like to add this other part to, I also added something because I need this other capability. That's my dream on this. Okay, but at least then we'd be directing staff more specifically to address these things, and then after they do their presentation, if there was something that bothered us in there, we could separately ask for one-on-one meetings or something like that. So I just wanted you to know my intent on that before I read the motion.
Chair and members of the commission, sorry to interject, but my request to speak button is not working. Just want to remind the commission that pursuant to the charter, boards and commissions cannot direct staff. You can certainly make a motion for a future agenda item requesting staff provide that information.
So you're telling me politically, I have to create an agenda item to make a motion. So I've got to wait till the next meeting to make this motion.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that you can't make a motion to direct staff. You can have a motion to have this item brought at a future date. What you're specifically asking is to order staff to bring certain stuff back, and that's not in compliance with the charter. So you can request this be a future item, talk about all the stuff you're talking about. It's just it's a question of the appropriate wording.
So, I didn't quite, so how do I frame this then? Do I recommend to them, or do I?
So the proper way to frame it would just be to bring a future agenda item discussing those particular things.
As an agenda item.
Correct.
But the reason we talked about this before, I did some conferring, is to try to not make future meetings more difficult and say, hey, you're going to do a presentation. Throw this into your presentation so we don't have to separately do it as a one-off item.
And you can do that too. I mean, we're obviously not on the same wavelength here. I'm sorry about that. But my point is the commission can't direct staff to specifically do something. And what I'm trying to say, if you want staff to bring this information back to you, simply say, can you bring this back in some form, whether it's a memo, whether it's a part of an agenda item, or it's a separate item, however you want to do it.
And I can't ask them to have the form be.
Say request instead of direct.
Request? Oh, yeah, if I change, can I request them to do something?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then let me read this, and I've got 2 extra copies if anyone else wants to look at them. Do you want to look at a copy of this?
You want me to?
Yeah. Well, I'll leave you a copy. Okay, whatever. It's there if anyone wants to look at them. Okay, I would like to move that the commission request the treasurer's office and city manager's office to include in their upcoming presentations to the budget commission of the operating fund and the enterprise fund budgeted expenditures, an open FTE schedule showing by department all unfilled FTE positions through a recent FY25 date showing positions unfilled all of the fiscal year as well as unfilled over half of the fiscal year to date. I further move that the Treasurer's Office and City Manager's Office, further move that the Treasurer's Office and request, Treasurer's Office, I further move that the Treasurer's Office and City Manager's Office consider having their budget presentations include their respective unfilled FTE positions shown in their schedule and discuss how this information was considered in their FY25-26 operating budget and any substantive changes they made to their FTE budgeted positions from this review. So that's my motion with the key changes. We're now requesting them and we're asking them to consider. That's my motion. So moved.
To the city attorney or city manager or anybody, do you have a copy of what he's reading from or what he's making his motion in?
Chair Smith and members of the commission, I do not have a copy, but what he read sound reasonable and within the powers of the commission.
Well, then let's accept it the way that you read it. I don't mean accept it as an agenda item, but accept the wording. And if the staff, once they see this in writing, has some problem with it, I presume they can come back to us at a future date before this is agendized and
we need a second.
Consider it. So does anybody else on the dais here, number one, want to second that motion? I guess we don't go further unless we have a second to it.
I'll second it.
All right. Vice Chair Schweiker provided a second. And, pardon? Who wants to ask a question? And I have a question from Commissioner Newman.
I understand what you're asking for. I would like to understand from Treasurer Andrews what kind of workload impact is that? And is this maybe a timing issue around putting that together?
Commissioner Newman, Commission, I am not sure yet, so let me take a look and see what reports we can generate on a, that can be easily generated off of our system, and let us kind of digest the requests and see what we can do.
Mr. Chair, if I may add to the discussion now, our request is working over here. I would say I know what it looks like. I've looked at it. I think that's the responsibility of the city manager. And so I'm very familiar with those reports. I will tell you there are complexities, and this is where the commissioner, when we had an offline subcommittee, and I think my reflection of one of the questions you asked is, are you asking the right question? That may have been on a different topic. And what I will tell you, having looked at that data, it's complex data. For example, I heard FTE, but so part-time versus full-time, that's a big distinction, I think. General fund, I heard enterprise funds. So is the fund matter? I hear time of opening. I will tell you, about a year ago, we had a significant class and comp, and there was a moratorium for hiring. So literally shut down for 60 days, and maybe it was even longer. So there are complexities that have driven to the openings. Some are open for a long time, certain hard to fill. We need to fill them, but they're hard to fill, and so they may be beyond the time. So I just wanted to add that to the discussion, that it sounds fairly straightforward. This length of time, show us it's not quite as simple as that when you dive into the data, having looked at the data. So I just wanted to offer that for your deliberations.
And I guess the thing I'll add to that is the beauty of adding the word request is now it enables us possibly to talk to them as they look at what would be involved and maybe propose back, hey, I can do this, I can do that, and try to think, and do I need to do it for everyone, or do I just need to do it for, you know, this dollar amount? So I'm fine with that. And then, because they frankly, I guess, don't have to do anything. But I think this will open up a chance for us to talk about it to see if the substance of that can be incorporated into the budget derivation.
Commissioner Seitz?
My question is, maybe I should know this, so I apologize in advance. When we see the operating budget material from these departments, I expect that we would see a breakdown of personnel costs and utilities and supplies and some kind of high-level breakdown that tells us the trending of costs of personnel, and that's already factored into your presentations. Can you shed light on that for me?
Yes, absolutely, Commissioner Seitz, Commission. We are planning to provide for each department that has been requested to provide an overview of their operating budget. We will have some high-level picture or data on their number of FTEs, their personnel costs, their overtime at a high level.
And with a little history, or I don't mean a lot of history, but something where we can see change maybe that's to the point of the FTEs being open, then there's no cost in the current year and in the next budget year and so forth. Is there anything like that going to be presented?
Normally, we would just present the change from the prior year at the high level from a personnel cost, total personnel costs, new FTE requests. But if the commission would like further detailed information related to unfilled positions or specific overtime or specific FTE requests, then the direction and the motion from Commissioner Stevens will provide us direction to add the additional information.
Can you provide us maybe that format? I hear what you're saying, but I'm trying to see personnel costs, overtime, whatever you're already considering in the presentations.
Yes. Yes.
I think we probably have gone far out of bounds. I kept looking for the city attorney to reel us in here, but we're not really supposed to discuss or debate or even clarify an agenda item. It's merely a proposal to make this an agenda item. And well, I have a motion and a second, and I have no further speakers, so I guess I'll ask you to push yes, no, or maybe on your buttons. And it is approved 5-2, so it will be incorporated as an agenda item, and we'll figure it out from there. Seeing no further business, I'll entertain a motion to let Carla speak.
It was my understanding that Commissioner Stevens was going to propose another agenda item that accompanied that had to do with overtime. Because as I said last meeting, you can't really have one discussion without the other.
I'm sorry, Mr. Stevens, I really wasn't aware you had another item. Proceed.
I told Commissioner Carl I would get this in advance, and it didn't get done until like shortly before the meeting. And so I was hoping she could look at it, make any changes she wanted. Have you even seen this?
Yes, I read it.
Oh, okay.
And
So
I just have one friendly amendment, if possible.
you just have what? Oh, okay. You'll have your correction then, or whatever. Okay. Proposed future agenda item. It's for personal overtime review. Oh, wait, let me cast it beforehand. We wanted to look at, have some feedback on certain overtime situations. After doing some pre-meeting discussions, I couldn't figure out how to do it for everything, so we decided the most important ones were police and fire. So this proposal is just going to right now include police and fire. We can later on expand it if we want to. This is in response to Commissioner Carlos, me saying we ought to look at overtime, but her also saying we need to look at all aspects of overtime, including the human impact that should be considered. So this motion, the idea of this motion is to have police and fire put a list together of this, and then the ask is just for them to report back to us their views on overtime as opposed to getting into tremendous detail. So based on that, I'll read I'll read the proposed future agenda item. It would be called Personnel Overtime Review, to prepare a listing of a recent fiscal year to date of individuals showing only their position description and not their name for police and fire departments with overtime pay exceeding 50% of their base pay, and also those whereby their overtime pay exceeds 25% of their base pay, showing the position name and overtime pay as a percentage of their base pay, and describe the department's approach to monitoring and managing acceptable levels of overtime and evaluating situations whereby excessive overtime for an individual can be detrimental to their performance or safety. So that's the proposed agenda item, and it was intentionally written broad enough so that it basically says, show us a list of these things so we can get a feel for it, and then talk to us about it and tell us your views so we can best understand your approach to overtime.
And I think I understand where you're headed with this, I think, Commissioner Stevens. I'm not sure this fits the definition of an agenda item. I think an agenda item would be something that you want to agendize for future discussion, a staff presentation on overtime. And these will be the details you might like to have in there, but it's, am I wrong? I mean, somebody from staff correct me or tell me how to put this into words. Right now, this is just a request for information.
Certainly the chair and members of the commission, certainly the commission could request information versus a presentation. And I think your item is set up to not only just propose topics for a future agenda, but or other documentation or a memo. So I don't know if Commissioner Stevens, if you're requesting actual presentation or you want a memo on the topic.
I thought the agenda item would be the report that would show the overtime people, and then there would be a presentation of that report. Here's all the people that meet the overtime criteria. Let me now tell you my approach to, tell you my view on this report.
So Chair Smith and Commissioner Stevens and members of the commission, you certainly could agendize that, request a report covering the topics that you discussed, and have it presented at a budget commission meeting for discussion.
Do you want me to just make this more general and just say we'd like to have an agenda item for a police and fire department report on overtime to date?
That's your discretion. You can do. I think you can do either.
If I can interject here, if your objective is to look at personnel overtime, and you can hand this to staff and say, you know, these are the things I'd like to have you present to us. But I think as far as an agenda item, it's just we would like to agendize a discussion of overtime in the city of Scottsdale.
And that's fine.
And then staff will give you a copy of this, and you can be responsive. Does that cause anybody any angst over there at the table?
Chair and members of the commission, it doesn't cause us angst, but if the specific intent is to focus on police and fire versus overtime in other departments, you could agendize it to be a discussion of overtime involving the police and fire departments versus, you know, the city manager could speak to this better than I can. I don't know how much overtime is utilized in other departments, maybe the water department.
I personally would just make it for the city of Scottsdale. I agree with you, there's not going to be that much everywhere else, but at least no stone is unturned if we just say for employees in Scottsdale. Commissioner Carlin.
I would like to make 2 friendly amendments to this motion. You know, prepare the following for discussion, and then after the fire department add, and other departments that consistently have a high level of overtime. So it's not the whole city, but it's police, fire, and any other departments that consistently have a high level of overtime.
Okay, so we're in a do loop here of either agendizing a future discussion of overtime in the city, or future discussion of overtime in police and fire, or future overtime in departments that incur overtime, or just future overtime, period.
Why don't we just make a discussion of overtime, leave it very broad, and then we can separately talk to staff about what they're doing, but what Commissioner Carla said sounds perfect.
Yeah, because the whole point is if you're going to discuss the FTEs and that situation, you need to discuss this also. I mean, and you need to have the information. You know, I think Commissioner Stevens did a good job of lining out the information that would help the discussion. Because just to say we want to discuss overtime, you know, we need some specifics. And again, I don't think it should be just police and fire. If any other department consistently has high overtime, they need to be part of the discussion also. And so if you add the friendly amendment to this, doesn't it work as a motion?
Okay, again, I think I will terminate discussion here because we're getting into debating the pros and cons and mechanics of how we might do this. Going back to you, Commissioner Stevens, can you put in 10 words or less what you would like to have as an agenda item from this? Count your words carefully.
Yeah. Can I do an agenda item for staff to make a presentation? Or is it, I can do that?
If it's an agenda item, they'll have to make a presentation.
Okay, then I'd like to have propose an agenda item for staff to report on overtime, period, I guess, overtime.
Period is good, yeah. And it's, and you don't even have to say for staff to do it, because certainly no one else in the audience is going to do it. So if it's going to be done, it'll be staff. So let's agendize to have a discussion of overtime. And
can you vote on that agenda item to put it on the agenda?
I beg your pardon?
Chair and members of the commission, can you take a vote on that to put it on the commission just as a formality?
What's he want me to do?
That was, I made a motion.
Yeah, no, he can, but our screen still shows the last vote. We need to pull up a new vote.
I second the motion.
And now pick a button, yes, no, or maybe. And this one is unanimous. You have, Chairman Stevens, you have any other,
No,
Commissioner
that was
Stevens? Does anyone else have any other items? Commissioner Newman?
Going back to our discussion we had around the discussion around Rio Verde Drive, I think we ought to agendize the policy issue, the budget policy issue around use of those funds, and as it relates to when that preserve tax sunsets, and make a recommendation to council from a budget policy perspective. And I'll leave it to the chair for his discretion to how to structure that, but.
Chair has no idea how to structure it. So.
But I do think it's something, it's got enough, we had enough discussion on it. It's relevant because there's a big project. It's not like a small project. There's a big consideration of a project there relative to a policy, a budget use of funds. And I think it's worth having a discussion on that.
I think I understand what you're talking about, whether it's permitted within in the four corners of the or the 2004 language or the 2018 language of Prop 420. It would be my thought that we can give as our alert to the city council, this is something that they ought to look at, but it's a legal determination that I don't think the seven of us are qualified to look at it, even if we had further information. So I would not propose agendizing it for further discussion, but if you want to make that motion, go right ahead. And while you're thinking about it, Commissioner Carla would like to weigh in.
Go ahead.
Yes, I'm confused. Is the question about whether or not the overpass is appropriate as a budget item? Is it appropriate under 420, or are we talking about the sunsetting, the early sunsetting of the 2004 tax? Or is it all of those? I'm not sure which one you're focusing on.
Yeah, I'm having trouble separating them all because they all play together. So perhaps I should think about that and we can come back to it.
City Attorney is going to bail us out here.
Chair and members of the commission, we are getting far afield, as Chair Smith pointed out earlier. This item doesn't permit actual discussion. It simply permits agendizing an item for a future meeting. So we probably need to rein ourselves in.
And my thinking out loud is really trying to decide what to agendize. To me, it's a discussion of the topic we talked about today. Now, it was presented to us, but I think we ought to discuss that from a policy perspective. I will withdraw it, and I'll come back with some thought, a way to do that at the next meeting. How's that?
Are we done with that one then, you mean? Or?
I'm done.
If you're done, we're done. Anyone else have any thrilling items they'd like to see on the agenda in the future? Seeing no takers, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Commissioner Seitz moved to adjourn, and it was seconded by anybody? Did you do the second?
I'll be the second, I don't care.
Vice Chair Schweiker will say did the second, and now we're voting, and it's unanimous. We finally agreed on something. We're going to adjourn.